This is a complete audiobook reading of what the Buddha taught. The Buddha, whose personal name was Siddhartha and family name Gautama, lived in North India in the 6th century BC. His father, Suddhodana, was the ruler of the kingdom of the Sakyas in modern Nepal. His mother was Queen Maya. According to the custom of the time, he was married quite young, at the age of 16, to a beautiful and devoted young princess named Yasodhara. The young prince lived in his palace with every luxury at his command. But all of a sudden, confronted with the reality of life and the suffering of mankind, he decided to find the solution, the way out of this universal suffering. At the age of 29, soon after the birth of his only child Rahula, he left his kingdom and became an ascetic in search of his solution. For 6 years, the ascetic Gautama wandered about the valley of Ganges, meeting famous religious teachers, studying and following their systems and methods, and submitting himself to rigorous ascetic practices. They did not satisfy him, so he abandoned all traditional religions and their methods and went his own way. It was thus that one evening, seated under a tree, since then known as the Bodhi or Botri, the tree of wisdom, on the bank of the river Naranjara at Budaya, near Gaya in modern Bihar, at the age of 35, Gautama attained enlightenment, after which he was known as the Buddha, the Enlightened One. After his enlightenment, Gautama the Buddha delivered his first sermon to a group of 5 ascetics, his old colleagues, in the Deer Park at Isipatana, modern Sarnath, near Benares. From that day, for 45 years, he taught all classes of men and women, kings and peasants, Brahmins and outcasts, bankers and beggars, holy men and robbers, without making the slightest distinction between them. He recognized no differences of caste or social groupings, and the way he preached was open to all men and women who were ready to understand and follow it. At the age of 80, the Buddha passed away at Kusinara in modern Uttar Pradesh in India. Today, Buddhism is found in Ceylon, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Tibet, China, Japan, Mongolia, Korea, Laos, Formosa, in some parts of India, Pakistan, and Nepal, and also in Soviet Union. The Buddhist population of the world is over 500 million. Chapter 1. The Buddhist Attitude of Mind. Among the founders of religions, the Buddha, if we are permitted to call him the founder of a religion in the popular sense of the term, was the only teacher who did not claim to be other than a human being, pure and simple. Other teachers were either God or his incarnations in different forms, or inspired by him. The Buddha was not only a human being, he claimed no inspiration from any god or external power either. He attributed all his realization, attainments, and achievements to human endeavor and human intelligence. A man, and only a man, can become Buddha. Every man has within himself the potentiality of becoming a Buddha, if he so wills it and endeavors. We can call the Buddha a man par excellence. He was so perfect in his humanness that he came to be regarded later in popular religion almost as superhuman. Man's position, according to Buddhism, is supreme. Man is his own master, and there is no higher being or power that sits in judgment over his destiny. One is one's own refuge. Who else could be the refuge, said the Buddha. He admonished his disciples to be a refuge to themselves, and never to seek refuge in or help from anybody else. He taught, encouraged, and stimulated each person to develop himself and to work out his own emancipation, for man has the power to liberate himself from all bondage through his own personal effort and intelligence. The Buddha says, you should do your work, for the Tathagatas, one, only teach the way. If the Buddha is to be called a savior at all, it is only in the sense that he discovered and showed the path to liberation, nirvana. But we must tread the path ourselves. It is on this principle of individual responsibility that the Buddha allows freedom to his disciples. In the Mahaparinibbānis, the Buddha says that he never thought of controlling the Sangha, order of monks, nor did he wanted the Sangha to depend on him. He said that there was no esoteric doctrine in his teaching, nothing hidden in the closed fist of the teacher, or to put it in other words, there never was anything up his sleeve. The freedom of thought allowed by the Buddha is unheard of elsewhere in the history of religions. This freedom is necessary because, according to the Buddha, man's emancipation depends on his own realization of truth, and not on the benevolent grace of a god or any external power as a reward for his obedient good behavior. The Buddha once visited a small town called Kesaputta in the kingdom of Kosala. The inhabitants of this town were known by the common name Kalama. When they heard that the Buddha was in their town, the Kalamas paid him a visit and told him, "Sir, there are some recluses and Brahmapas who visit Kesaputta. They explain and illumine only their own doctrines, and despise, condemn, and spurn others' doctrines. Then come other recluses and Brahmapas, and they, too, in their turn explain and illumine only their own doctrines, and only despise, condemn, and spurn others' doctrines. But for us, sir, we have always doubt and perplexity as to who among these venerable recluses and Brahmapas spoke the truth, and who spoke falsehood." Then the Buddha gave them this advice, unique in the history of religions. "Yes, Calamus, it is proper that you have doubt, that you have perplexity, for a doubt has arisen in a matter which is doubtful. Now, look you, Calamus, do not be led by reports or tradition or hearsay. Be not led by the authority of religious texts, nor by the delight in speculative opinions, nor by seeming possibilities, nor by the idea, 'This is our teacher.' But, O Calamus, when you know for yourselves that certain things are unwholesome, kusala, and wrong and bad, then give them up. And when you know for yourselves that certain things are wholesome kusala and good, then accept them and follow them." The Buddha went even further. He told the bhikkhus that a disciple should examine even the Tathagata himself, so that he, the disciple, might be fully convinced of the true value of the teacher whom he followed. According to the Buddhist teaching, doubt, vikikikpa, is one of the 5 hindrances. Nivarana, 1, to the clear understanding of truth and to spiritual progress, or, for that matter, to any progress. Doubt, however, is not a sin because there are no articles of faith in Buddhism. In fact, there is no sin in Buddhism as sin is understood in some religions. The root of all evil is ignorance, avidya, and false views. Mikavatit. It is an undeniable fact that as long as there is doubt, perplexity, wavering, no progress is possible. It is also equally undeniable that there must be doubt as long as one does not understand or see clearly. But in order to progress further, it is absolutely necessary to get rid of doubt. To get rid of doubt, one has to see clearly. There is no point in saying that one should not doubt or one should believe. Just to say, "I believe," does not mean that you understand and see. When a student works on a mathematical problem, he comes to a stage beyond which he does not know how to proceed, and where he is in doubt and perplexity. As long as he has this doubt, he cannot proceed. If he wants to proceed, he must resolve this doubt. And there are ways of resolving that doubt. Just to say, "I believe," or "I do not doubt," will certainly not solve the problem. To force oneself to believe and to accept a thing without understanding is political and not spiritual or intellectual. The Buddha was always eager to dispel doubt. Even just a few minutes before his death, he requested his disciples several times to ask him if they had any doubts about his teaching, and not to feel sorry later that they could not clear those doubts. But the disciples were silent. What he said then was touching. "If it is through respect for the teacher that you do not ask anything, let even one of you inform his friend, i.e., let one tell his friend, so that the latter may ask the question on the other's behalf." Not only the freedom of thought, but also the tolerance allowed by the Buddha is astonishing to the student of the history of religions. Once in Nalanda, a prominent and wealthy householder named Upali, a well-known lay disciple of Nigantha Netaputta Jaina Mahavira, was expressly sent by Mahavira himself to meet the Buddha and defeat him in argument on certain points in the theory of karma, because the Buddha's view on the subject were different from those of Mahavira. Quite contrary to expectations, Upali, at the end of the discussion, was convinced that the views of the Buddha were right and those of his master were wrong. So he begged the Buddha to accept him as one of his lay disciples, Upasaka. But the Buddha asked him to reconsider it, and not to be in a hurry, for considering carefully is good for well-known men like you. When Upali expressed his desire again, the Buddha requested him to continue to respect and support his old religious teachers as he used to. In the 3rd century BC, the great Buddhist emperor Ashoka of India, following this noble example of tolerance and understanding, honored and supported all other religions in his vast empire. In one of his edicts carved on the rock, the original of which one may read even today, the emperor declared, "One should not honor only one's own religion and condemn the religions of others, but one should honor others' religions for this or that reason. So doing, one helps one's own religion to grow and renders service to the religions of others too. In acting otherwise, one digs the grave of one's own religion and also does harm to other religions. Whosoever honors his own religion and condemns other religions does so indeed through devotion to his own religion, thinking, 'I will glorify my own religion,' but on the contrary, in so doing he injures his own religion more gravely. So concord is good. Let all listen, and be willing to listen to the doctrines professed by others." We should add here that this spirit of sympathetic understanding has been from the beginning one of the most cherished ideals of Buddhist culture and civilization. That is why there is not a single example of persecution or the shedding of a drop of blood in converting people to Buddhism, or in its propagation during its long history of 2,500 years. It spread peacefully all over the continent of Asia, having more than 500 million adherents today. Violence in any form, under any pretext whatsoever, is absolutely against the teaching of the Buddha. The question has often asked, is Buddhism a religion or a philosophy? It does not matter what you call it. Buddhism remains what it is, whatever label you may put on it. The label is immaterial. Even the label Buddhism, which we give to the teaching of the Buddha, is of little importance. The name one gives it is inessential. What's in a name? That which we call a rose, by other name would smell as sweet. In the same way, truth need no label. It is neither Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, nor Muslim. It is not the monopoly of anybody. Sectarian labels are a hindrance to the independent understanding of truth, and they produce harmful prejudices in men's mind. This is true not only in intellectual and spiritual matters, but also in human relations. When, for instance, we meet a man, we do not look on him as a human being, but we put a label on him, such as English, French, German, American, or Jew, and regard him with all the prejudices associated with that label in our mind. Yet, he may be completely free from those attributes which we have put on him. People are so fond of discriminative labels that they even go to the length of putting them on human qualities and emotions common to all. So they talk of different brands of charity, as for example of Buddhist charity or Christian charity, and look down upon other brands of charity. But charity cannot be sectarian. It is neither Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, nor Muslim. The love of a mother for her child is neither Buddhist nor Christian. It is mother love. Human qualities and emotions like love, charity, compassion, tolerance, patience, friendship, desire, hatred, ill will, ignorance, conceit, etc., need no sectarian labels. They belong to no particular religions. To the seeker after truth, it is immaterial from where an idea comes. The source and development of an idea is a matter for the academic. In fact, in order to understand truth, it is not necessary even to know whether the teaching comes from the Buddha or from anyone else. What is essential is seeing the thing, understanding it. There is an important story in the Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta Note 0.14, which illustrate this. The Buddha once spent a night in a potter's shed. In the same shed, there was a young recluse who had arrived there earlier. They did not know each other. The Buddha observed the recluse and thought to himself, "Pleasant are the ways of this young man. It would be good if I should ask about him." So the Buddha asked him, "O bhikkhu, in whose name have you left home? Or, who is your master? Or whose doctrine do you like?" "O friend," answered the young man, "there is the recluse Gotama, a Sakyan scion, who left the Saka family to become a recluse. There is high repute abroad of him that he is an arahant, a fully enlightened one. He is my master, and I like his doctrine. Where does the Blessed One, the arahant, the fully enlightened one, live at the present time?" "In the countries to the north, friend. There is a city called Savatthi. It is there that that Blessed One, the arahant, the fully enlightened one, is now living." "Have you ever seen him, the Blessed One? Would you recognize him if you saw him?" "I have never seen the Blessed One, nor should I recognize him if I saw him," the Buddha realized. It was in his name that this unknown young man had left home and become a recluse. But without divulging his own identity, he said, "O bhikkhu, I will teach you the doctrine. Listen and pay attention. I will speak." "Very well, friend," said the young man in assent. Then the Buddha delivered to this young man a most remarkable discourse explaining truth, the gist of which is given later. It was only at the end of the discourse that this young recluse, whose name was Pukusati, realized that the person who spoke to him was the Buddha himself. So he got up, went before the Buddha, bowed down at feet of the master, and apologized him for calling him friend unknowingly. He then begged the Buddha to ordain him and admit him into the order of Sangha. The Buddha asked him whether he had the alms bowl and the robes ready. A bhikkhu must have 3 robes and alms bowl for begging food. When Pukusati replied in the negative, the Buddha said that the Tathagatas would not ordain a person unless the alms bowl and robes are ready. So Pukusati went out in search of an alms bowl and robes, but was unfortunately savaged by a cow and died. Later, when this sad news reached the Buddha, he announced that Pukusati was a wise man who had already seen the truth and attained the penultimate stage in the realization of nirvana, and that he was born in a realm where he would become an arahant and finally passed away, never to return this world again. From this story, it is quite clear that when Pukusati listened to the Buddha and understood his teaching, he did not know who was speaking to him or whose teaching it was. He saw truth. If the medicine is good, the disease will be cured. It is not necessary to know who prepared it or where it came from. Almost all religions are built on faith, rather blind faith, it would seem. But in Buddhism, emphasis is laid on seeing, knowing, understanding, and not on faith or belief. In Buddhist texts, there is a word saddha, siddhata, which is usually translated as faith or belief. But saddha is not faith as such, but rather confidence born out of conviction. In popular Buddhism, and also in ordinary usage in the texts, the word saddha, it must be admitted, has an element of faith, in the sense that it signifies devotion to the Buddha, the Dhamma teaching, and the Sangha, the order. According to Ashtanga, the great Buddhist philosopher of the 4th century AC, Sraddha has 3 aspects. 1. Full and firm conviction that a thing is. 2. Serene joy at good qualities. And 3. Aspiration or wish to achieve an object in view. However you put it, faith or belief as understood by most religions has little to do with Buddhism. The question of belief arises when there is no seeing in every sense of the word. The moment you see, the question of belief disappears. If I tell you that I have a gem hidden in the folded palm of my hand, the question of belief arises because you do not see it yourself. But if I unclench my fist and show you the gem, then you see it for yourself, and the question of belief does not arise. So the phrase in ancient Buddhist text reads, realizing as one sees a gem in the palm. A disciple of the Buddha named Musala tells another monk, friend Savita, without devotion, faith, or belief, without liking or inclination, without hearsay or tradition, without considering apparent reasons, without delight in the speculations of opinions, I know and see that the cessation of becoming is nirvana. And the Buddha says, O bhikkhus, I say that the destruction of defilement and impurities is meant for a person who knows and who sees, and not for a person who does not know and does not see. It is always a question of knowing and seeing, and not that of believing. The teaching of the Buddha is qualified as ihipasika, inviting you to come and see, but not to come and believe. The expressions used everywhere in Buddhist text referring to persons who realize truth are, the dustless and stainless eye of truth, Dhammakaku, has arisen. He has seen truth, has attained truth, has known truth, has penetrated into truth, has crossed over doubt, is without wavering. Thus, with right wisdom, he sees it as it is, Yata Buddham. With reference to his own enlightenment, the Buddha said, the eye was born, knowledge was born, wisdom was born, science was born, light was born. It is always seeing through knowledge or wisdom, nanadasana, and not believing through faith. This was more and more appreciated at a time when Brahmanic orthodoxy insisted on believing and accepting their tradition and authority as the only truth without question. Once a group of learned and well-known Brahmins went to see the Buddha and had a long discussion with him. One of the group, a Brahmin youth of 16 years age named Kapatika, considered by them all to be an exceptionally brilliant mind, put a question to the Buddha. Venerable Gautama, there are the ancient holy scriptures of the Brahmins, handed down along the line by unbroken oral tradition of texts. With regard to them, Brahmins come to the absolute conclusion, this alone is truth and everything else is false. Now, what does the Venerable Gautama say about this? The Buddha inquired. Among Brahmins, is there any one single Brahmin who claims that he personally knows and sees that this alone is truth and everything else is false? The young man was frank and said, no. Then, is there any one single teacher or a teacher of teachers of Brahmins back to the 7th generation, or even any one of those original authors of those scriptures who claims that he knows and he sees this alone is truth and everything else is false? No. Then it is like a line of blind men, each holding on to the preceding one. The first one does not see, the middle one also does not see, the last one also does not see. Thus, it seems to me that the state of the Brahmins is like that of a line of blind men. Then the Buddha gave advice of extreme importance to the group of Brahmins. It is not proper for a wise man who maintains that protects truth to come to the conclusion, this alone is truth and everything else is false. Asked by the young Brahmin to explain the idea of maintaining or protecting truth, the Buddha said, a man has a faith. If he says, this is my faith, so far he maintains truth, but by that he cannot proceed to the absolute conclusion, this alone is truth and everything else is false. In other words, a man may believe what he likes, and he may say, I believe this, so far he respects truth. But because of his belief or faith, he should not say that what he believes is alone the truth and everything else is false. The Buddha says, to be attached to one thing, to a certain view, and to look down upon other things, views, as inferior, this the wise men call a fetter. Once the Buddha explained the doctrine of cause and effect to his disciples, and they said that they saw it and understood it clearly. Then the Buddha said, O bhikkhus, even this view, which is so pure and so clear, if you cling to it, if you fondle it, if you treasure it, if you are attached to it, then you do not understand that the teaching is similar to a raft, which is for crossing over, and not for getting hold of. Elsewhere, the Buddha explains this famous simile in which his teaching is compared to a raft for crossing over, and not for getting hold of and carrying on one's back. O bhikkhus, a man is on a journey. He comes to a vast stretch of water. On this side the shore is dangerous, but on the other it is safe and without danger. No boat goes to the other shore, which is safe and without danger, nor is there any bridge for crossing over. He says to himself, this sea of water is vast, and the shore on this side is full of danger, but on the other shore it is safe and without danger. No boat goes to the other side, nor is there a bridge for crossing over. It would be good, therefore, if I would gather grass, wood, branches, and leaves to make a raft, and with the help of the raft cross over safely to the other side, exerting myself with my hands and feet. Then that man, O bhikkhus, gathers grass, wood, branches, and leaves, and makes a raft, and with the help of that raft crosses over safely to the other side, exerting himself with his hands and feet. Having crossed over and got to the other side, he thinks, this raft was of great help to me. With its aid I have crossed safely over to this side, exerting myself with my hands and feet. It would be good if I carried this raft on my head or on my back wherever I go. What do you think, O bhikkhus, if he acted in this way, would that man be acting properly with regard to the raft? No. In which way, then, would he be acting properly with regard to the raft? Having crossed and gone over to the other side, suppose that man should think, this raft was a great help to me. With its aid I have crossed safely over to this side, exerting myself with my hands and feet. It would be good if I beached this raft on the shore, or moored it and left it afloat, and then went on my way wherever it may be. Acting in this way, would that man act properly with regard to that raft? In the same manner, O bhikkhus, I have taught a doctrine similar to a raft. It is for crossing over, and not for carrying, lit, getting hold of. You, O bhikkhus, who understand that the teaching is similar to a raft, should give up even good things, a Dhamma. From this parable, it is quite clear that the Buddha's teaching is meant to carry man to safety, peace, happiness, tranquility, the attainment of nirvana. The whole doctrine taught by the Buddha leads to this end. He did not say things just to satisfy intellectual curiosity. He was a practical teacher and taught only those things which would bring peace and happiness to man. The Buddha was once staying in a Simsapa forest in Koshambi near Allahabad. He took a few leaves into his hand and asked his disciples, "What do you think, O bhikkhus? Which is more, these few leaves in my hand or the leaves in the forest over here?" "Sir, very few are the leaves in the hand of the Blessed One, but indeed the leaves in the Simsapa forest over here are very much more abundant." "Even so, bhikkhus, of what I have known I have told you only a little. What I have not told you is very much more. And why have I not told you those things? Because that is not useful, not leading to nirvana. That is why I have not told you those things. It is futile, as some scholars vainly try to do, for us to speculate in what the Buddha knew but did not tell us. The Buddha was not interested in discussing unnecessary metaphysical questions, which are purely speculative and which create imaginary problems. He considered them as a wildness of opinions. It seems that there were some among his own disciples who did not appreciate this attitude of his. For we have the example of one of them, Malunkyaputta by name, who put to the Buddha 10 well-known classical questions on metaphysical problems and demanded answers. One day, Malunkyaputta got up from his afternoon meditation, went to the Buddha, saluted him, sat on one side and said, "Sir, when I was all alone meditating, this thought occurred to me. There are these problems unexplained, put aside and rejected by the Blessed One, namely, 1. Is the universe eternal, or 2. Is it not eternal? 3. Is the universe finite, or 4. Is it infinite? 5. Is soul the same as body, or 6. Is soul one thing and body another thing? 7. Does the Tathagata exist after death? Or 8, does he not exist after death? Or 10, does he both at the same time exist after death? Or 10, does he both at the same time not exist and not exist? And these problems the Blessed One does not explain to me. This attitude does not please me. I do not appreciate it. I will go to the Blessed One, ask him about this matter. If the Blessed One explains them to me, then I will continue to follow the holy life under him. If he does not explain them, I will leave the order and go away. If the Blessed One knows that the universe is eternal, let him explain it to me so. If the Blessed One knows that the universe is not eternal, let him say so. If the Blessed One does not know whether the universe is eternal or not, etc., then for a person who does not know, it is straightforward to say, "I do not know, I do not see." The Buddha's reply to Malunkyaputta should do good to many millions in the world today who are wasting valuable time on such metaphysical questions and unnecessarily disturbing their peace of mind. "Did I ever tell you, Malunkyaputta? Come, Malunkyaputta, lead the holy life under me. I will explain these questions to you." "No, sir." "Then, Malunkyaputta, even you? Did you tell me?" "Sir, I will lead the holy life under the Blessed One, and the Blessed One will explain these questions to me?" "No, sir." "Even now, Malunkyaputta, I do not tell you, come and lead the holy life under me. I will explain these questions to you." "And you do not tell me either, sir, I will lead the holy life under the Blessed One, and he will explain these questions to me." Under these circumstances, you foolish one who refuses whom? Malunkyaputta, if anyone says, "I will not lead the holy life under the Blessed One until he explains these questions," he may die with these questions unanswered by the Tathagata. Suppose, Malunkyaputta, a man is wounded by the poisoned arrow and his friends and relatives bring him to a surgeon. Suppose the man should then say, "I will not let this arrow be taken out until I know who shot me, whether he is a Kshatriya of the low caste, what his name and family may be, whether he is tall, short, or of medium stature, whether his complexion is black, brown, or golden, from which village, town, or city he comes. I will not let this arrow be taken out until I know the kind of bow with which I was shot, the kind of bowstring used, the type of arrow, what sort of feather was used on the arrow, and with what kind of material the point of the arrow was made." Malunkyaputta, that man would die without knowing any of these things. Even so, Malunkyaputta, if anyone says, "I will not follow the holy life under the Blessed One until he answers these questions, such as whether the universe is eternal or not, etc., he would die with these questions unanswered by the Tathagata. Then the Buddha explains to Malunkyaputta that the holy life does not depend on these views. Whatever opinion one may have about these problems, there is birth, old age, decay, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, distress, the cessation of which, i.e., nirvana, I declare in this very life. Therefore, Malunkyaputta, bear in mind what I have explained. What are the things that I have not explained? Whether the universe is eternal or not, etc., those 10 opinions I have not explained. Why, Malunkyaputta, have not explained them? Because it is not useful. It is not fundamentally connected with the spiritual holy life, is not conducive to aversion, detachment, cessation, tranquility, deep penetration, full realization, nirvana. That is why I have not told you about them. Then, what, Malunkyaputta, have I explained? I have explained dukkha, the arising of dukkha, the cessation of dukkha, and the way leading to the cessation of dukkha. Why, Malunkyaputta, have I explained them? Because it is useful, is fundamentally connected with the spiritual holy life, is conducive to aversion, detachment, cessation, tranquility, deep penetration, full realization, nirvana. Therefore, I have explained them. Let us now examine the 4 noble truths which the Buddha told Malunkyaputta he had explained. The 4 Noble Truths. Chapter 0.2. The First Noble Truth. The heart of Buddha's teaching lies in the 4 Noble Truths, Katari Arya Sakani, which he expounded in his very first sermon to his old colleagues, the 5 Ascetics, at Isipatana, modern Sarnath near Benares. In this sermon, as we have it in the original texts, these 4 truths are given briefly, but there are innumerable places in the early Buddhist scriptures where they are explained again and again, with greater detail and in different ways. If we study the 4 Noble Truths with the help of these references and explanations, we get a fairly good and accurate account of the essential teachings of the Buddha according to the original texts. The 4 Noble Truths are 1. Dukkha, 2. Samudaya, the arising or origin of dukkha, 3. Nirodha, the cessation of dukkha, 4. Megha, the way leading to the cessation of dukkha. The first noble truth, dukkha aryasaka, is generally translated by almost all scholars as the noble truth of suffering, and it is interpreted to mean that life according to Buddhism is nothing but suffering and pain. Both translation and interpretation are highly unsatisfactory and misleading. It is because of this limited, free, easy translation and its superficial interpretation that many people have been misled into regarding Buddhism as pessimistic. First of all, Buddhism is neither pessimistic nor optimistic. If anything at all, it is realistic, for it takes a realistic view of life and of the world. It looks at things objectively, yatha Buddham. It does not falsely lull you into living in a fool's paradise, nor does not frighten and agonize you with all kinds of imaginary fears and sins. It tells you exactly and objectively what you are and what the world around you is, and shows you the way to perfect freedom, peace, tranquility, and happiness. One physician may gravely exaggerate an illness and give up hope altogether. Another may ignorantly declare that there is no illness and that no treatment is necessary, thus deceiving the patient with false consolation. You may call the first one pessimistic and the second optimistic. Both are equally dangerous. But a third physician diagnosed the symptoms correctly, understands the cause and the nature of the illness, see clearly that it can be cured, and courageously administers a course of treatment, thus saving his patient. The Buddha is like the last physician. He is the wise and scientific doctor for the ills of the world, Bisaka or Baisajya Guru. It is true that the Pali word dukkha, or Sanskrit dukkha, in ordinary usage means suffering, pain, sorrow, or misery, as opposed to the word sukha meaning happiness, comfort, or ease. But the term dukkha, as the first noble truth, which represents the Buddha's view of life and the world, has a deeper philosophical meaning and connotes enormously wider senses. It is admitted that the term dukkha in the first noble truth contains, quite obviously, the ordinary meaning of suffering, but in addition it also includes deeper ideas such as imperfection, impermanence, emptiness, insubstantiality. It is difficult, therefore, to find one word to embrace the whole conception of the term dukkha as the first noble truth, and so it is better to leave it untranslated than to give an inadequate and wrong idea of it by conveniently translating it as suffering or pain. The Buddha does not deny happiness in life when he says there is suffering. On the contrary, he admits different forms of happiness, both material and spiritual, for laymen and monks. In the Anguttara Nikaya, one of the 5 original collections in Pali containing the Buddha's discourses, there is a list of happinesses, sukhani, such as the happiness of family and the happiness of the life of recluse, the happiness of sense pleasures and the happiness of renunciation, the happiness of attachment and the happiness of detachment, physical happiness and mental happiness, etc. But all these are included in dukkha, even the very pure spiritual states of dhyana, requirement or trance, attained by the practice of higher meditation, free from even a shadow of suffering in the accepted sense of the word, states which may be described as unmixed happiness, as well as the state of dhyana which is free from sensations both pleasant, sukha, and unpleasant, dukkha, and is only pure equanimity and awareness. Even these very high spiritual states are included in dukkha. In one of the suttas of the Majjhima Nikaya, again one of the 5 original collections, after praising the spiritual happiness of these dhyanas, the Buddha says that they are impermanent, dukkha, and subject to change, anicca dukkha viparnamadama. Notice that the word dukkha is explicitly used. It is dukkha not because there is suffering in ordinary sense of the word, but because whatever is impermanent is dukkha, yad aniccatam dukkham. The Buddha was realistic and objective. He says with regard to life and the enjoyment of sense pleasures that one should clearly understand 3 things. 1. Attraction or enjoyment, asada. 2. Evil consequence or danger or unsatisfactoriness, adinava. And 3. Freedom or liberation, nissarana. When you see a pleasant, charming, and beautiful person, you like him or her, you are attracted. You enjoy seeing that person again and again. You derive pleasure and satisfaction from that person. This is enjoyment, asada. It is fact of experience, but this enjoyment is not permanent, just as that person and his or her attractions are not permanent either. When the situation changes, when you cannot see that person, when you are deprived of this enjoyment, you become sad, you may become unreasonable and unbalanced, you may even behave foolishly. This is evil, unsatisfactory, and dangerous side of the picture, adinava. This too is a fact of experience. Now, if you have no attachment to the person, if you are completely detached, that is freedom, liberation, nissarana. These 3 things are true with regard to all enjoyment in life. From this, it is evident that it is no question of pessimism or optimism, but that we must take account of the pleasure of life as well as of its pains and sorrows, and also of freedom from them, in order to understand life completely and objectively. Only then is true liberation possible. Regarding this question, the Buddha says, O bhikkhus, if any recluses or brahmanas do not understand objectively in this way that the enjoyment of sense pleasures is enjoyment, that their unsatisfactoriness is unsatisfactoriness, that liberation from them is liberation, then it is not possible that they themselves will certainly understand the desire for sense pleasures completely, or that they will be able to instruct another person to that end, or that person following their instruction will completely understand the desire for sense pleasures. But, O bhikkhus, if any recluses or brahmanas understand objectively in this way that the enjoyment of sense pleasures is enjoyment, that their unsatisfactoriness is unsatisfactoriness, that liberation from them is liberation, that it is possible that they themselves will certainly understand the desire for sense pleasures completely, and that they will be able to instruct another person to that end, and that the person following their instruction will completely understand the desire of sense pleasures. The conception of dukkha may be viewed from 3 aspects. 1. Dukkha as ordinary suffering, dukkha hukka. 2. Dukkha as produced by change, viparinama dukkha. And 3. Dukkha as conditioned states, samkhara dukkha. All kinds of suffering in life, like births, old age, sickness, death, association with unpleasant persons and conditions, separation from beloved ones and pleasant conditions, not getting what one desires, grief, lamentation, distress, all such forms of physical and mental suffering, which are universally accepted as suffering or pain, are included in dukkha as ordinary suffering, dukkha. A happy feeling, a happy condition in life is not permanent, not everlasting. It changes sooner or later. When it changes, it produces pain, suffering produced by change, viparinama dukkha, mentioned above. No one will dispute them. This aspect of the First Noble Truth is more popularly known because it is easy to understand. It is common experience in our daily life. But the third form of dukkha as conditioned states, samkhara dukkha, is the most important philosophical aspect of the First Noble Truth, and it requires some analytical explanation of what we consider as a being, as an individual, or as I. What we call a being or an individual or I, according to Buddhist philosophy, is only a combination of ever-changing physical and mental forces of energies, which may be divided into 5 groups or aggregates. Pankakanda. The Buddha says, in short, these 5 aggregates of attachment are dukkha. Elsewhere, he distinctly defines dukkha as the 5 aggregates. O bhikkhus, what is dukkha? It should be said that it is the 5 aggregates of attachment. Here it should be clearly understood that dukkha and the 5 aggregates are not 2 different things. The 5 aggregates themselves are dukkha. We will understand this point better when we have some notion of the 5 aggregates which constitute the so-called being. Now, what are these 5? The 5 aggregates. The first is the aggregate of matter, rupakinda. In this term, aggregate of matter are included the traditional 4 great elements, Katari Mahabhutani, namely solidity, fluidity, heat, and motion, and also the derivatives, upadaya rupa, of the 4 great elements. In the term derivatives of 4 great elements are included our 5 material sense organs, i.e. the faculties of eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body, and their corresponding objects in the external world, i.e. visible form, sound, odor, taste, and tangible things, and also some thoughts or ideas or conceptions which are in the sphere of mind objects, dharmayatana. Thus, the whole realm of matter, both internal and external, is included in the aggregate of matter. The second is the aggregate of sensations, vedana kaganda. In this group are included all our sensation, pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, experienced through the contact of physical and mental organs with the external world. They are of 6 kinds. The sensations experienced through the contact of the eye with visible forms, ear with sounds, nose with odor, tongue with taste, body with tangible objects, and mind, which is the 6th faculty in Buddhist philosophy, with mind. Jobs are thoughts or ideas. All our physical and mental sensations are included in this group. A word about what is meant by the term mind in Buddhist philosophy may be useful here. It should clearly be understood that mind is not spirit as opposed to matter. It should always be remembered that Buddhism does not recognize a spirit opposed to matter, as is accepted by most other systems of philosophies and religions. Mind is only a faculty or organ, indriya, like the eye or the ear. It can be controlled and developed like any other faculty, and the Buddha speaks quite often of the value of controlling and disciplining these 6 faculties. The difference between the eye and the mind as faculties is that the former senses the world of colors and visible forms, while the latter senses the world of ideas and thoughts and mental objects. We experience different fields of the world with different senses. We cannot hear colors, but we can see them, nor can we see sounds, but we can hear them. Thus, with our 5 physical sense organs, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, we experience only the world of visible forms, sounds, odors, tastes, and tangible objects. But these represent only a part of the world, not the whole world. What of ideas and thoughts? They are also a part of the world, but they cannot be sensed, they cannot be conceived by the faculty of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, or body. Yet they can be conceived by another faculty, which is mind. Now, ideas and thoughts are not independent of the world experienced by these 5 physical sense faculties. In fact, they depend on and are conditioned by physical experiences. Hence, a person born blind cannot have ideas of color experienced through his other faculties. Ideas and thoughts, which form a part of the world, are thus produced and conditioned by physical experiences and are conceived by the mind. Hence, mind, manas, is considered a sense faculty or organ, indriya, like the eye or the ear. The third is the aggregate of perceptions, senikundhat. Like sensations, perceptions also are of 6 kinds. in relation to 6 internal faculties and the corresponding 6 external objects. Like sensations, they are produced through the contact of our 6 faculties with the external world. It is the perception that recognize objects, whether physical or mental. The fourth is the aggregate of mental formations, samkarakanda. In this group are included all volitional activities, both good and bad. What is generally known as karma or kama comes under this group. The Buddha's own definition of karma should be remembered here. O bhikkhus, it is volition, cetana, that I call karma. Having willed, one acts through body, speech, and mind. Volition is mental construction, mental activity. Its function is to direct the mind in the sphere of good, bad, or neutral activities. Just like sensations and perceptions, volition is of 6 kinds, connected with the 6 internal faculties and the corresponding 6 objects, both physical and mental, in the external world. Sensations and perceptions are not volitional actions. They do not produce karmic effects. It is the only volitional actions, such as attention, will, determination, confidence, concentration, wisdom, energy, desire, repugnance or hate, ignorance, conceit, idea of self, etc., that can produce karmic effects. There are 52 such mental activities which constitute the aggregate of mental formation. The 5th is the aggregate of consciousness, vinana kunj. Consciousness is a reaction or response which has one of the 6 faculties, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, as its basis, and one of the 6 corresponding external phenomena, visible form, sound, odor, taste, tangible things, and mind objects, i.e. an idea or thought, as its object. For instance, visual consciousness has the eye as its basis and a visible form as its object. Mental consciousness has the mind as its basis and a mental object. So, consciousness is connected with other faculties. Thus, like sensation, perception, and volition, consciousness also is of 6 kinds, in relation to 6 internal faculties and corresponding 6 external objects. It should be clearly understood that consciousness does not recognize an object. It is only a sort of awareness of the presence of an object. When the eye comes in contact with a color, for instance, blue, visual consciousness arises, which simply is awareness of the presence of a color, but it does not recognize that it is blue. The term visual consciousness is a philosophical expression denoting the same idea as is conveyed by the ordinary word seeing. Seeing does not mean recognizing. So are the other forms of consciousness. It must be repeated here that according to Buddhist philosophy, there is no permanent, unchanging spirit which can be considered self or soul or ego as opposed to matter, and that consciousness should not be taken as spirit in opposition to matter. This point has to be particularly emphasized because a wrong notion that consciousness is a sort of self or soul that continues as a permanent substance through life has persisted from the earliest time to present day. One of the Buddha's own disciples, Sati by name, held that the master taught, "It is the same consciousness that transmigrates and wanders about." The Buddha asked him what he meant by consciousness. Sati's reply is classical. "It is that which expresses, which feels, which experiences the results of good and bad deeds here and there." "To whomever, you stupid one," remonstrated the master, "have you heard me expounding the doctrine in this manner? Haven't I in many ways explained consciousness as a rising out of conditions, that there is no arising of consciousness without conditions?" Then the Buddha went on to explain consciousness in detail. Consciousness is named according to whatever condition through which it arises. On account of the eye and visible forms arises a consciousness, and it is called visual consciousness. On account of ear and sounds arises a consciousness, and it is called auditory consciousness. On account of nose and odor arises a consciousness, and it is called olfactory consciousness. And it is called gustatory consciousness. On account of body and tangible objects arises a consciousness, and it is called tactile consciousness. On account of the mind and mind objects, ideas and thoughts, arises a consciousness, and it is called mental consciousness. Then the Buddha explained it further by an illustration. A fire is named according to the material on account of which it burns. A fire may burn on account of wood, and it is called wood fire. It may burn on account of straw, and then it is called straw fire. So consciousness is named according to the condition through which it arises. Dwelling on this point, Buddhaghosa, the great commentator, explains, "A fire that burns on account of wood burns only when there is a supply, but dies down in the very place when the supply is no longer there, because then the condition has changed, but the fire does not cross over to splinters, etc., and become a splinter fire, and so on. Even so, the consciousness that arises on account of the eye and visible forms arises in that gate of sense organ, i.e., in the eye, only when there is the condition of the eye, visible forms, light, and attention, but ceases then and there when the condition has changed, but the consciousness does not cross over to the ear, etc., and become auditory consciousness, and so on." The Buddha declared in unequivocal terms that consciousness depends on matter, sensation, perception, and mental formations, and that it cannot exist independently from them. He says, "Consciousness may exist having matter as it means, matter as its object, matter as its support, and seeking delight it may grow, increase, and develop. Or consciousness may exist having sensation as it means, or perception as it means, or mental formation as it means, mental formation as its object, mental formation as its support, and seeking delight it may grow, increase, and develop. Were a man to say, 'I shall show the coming, the going, the passing away, the arising, the growth, the increase, or the development of consciousness apart from matter, sensation, perception, and mental formations,' he would be speaking of something that does not exist. Very briefly, these are the 5 aggregates. What we call a being or an individual, or I, is only a convenient name or a label given to the combination of these 5 groups. They are all impermanent, all constantly changing. Whatever is impermanent is dukkha. This is the true meaning of the Buddha's words. In brief, the 5 aggregates of attachment are dukkha. They are not the same for 2 consecutive moments. Here, A is not equal to A. They are in flux of momentary arising and disappearing. O Brahmana, it is just like a mountain river, flowing far and swift, taking everything with it. There is no moment, no instant, no second when it stops flowing, but it goes on flowing and continuing. So Brahmana is human life like a mountain river. As the Buddha told Ratapala, the world is in continuous flux and is impermanent. One thing disappears, conditioning the appearance of the next in a series of cause and effect. There is no unchanging substance in them. There is nothing behind them that can be called a permanent self, Atman, individuality, or anything that can in reality be called I. Everyone will agree that neither matter nor sensation nor perception nor any of those mental activities nor consciousness can be really called I. But when these 5 physical and mental aggregates, which are independent, are working together in combination as a physio-psychological machine, we get the idea of I. But this is only a false idea, a mental formation, which is nothing but one of those 52 mental formations of the 4th aggregate which we have just discussed. Namely, it is the idea of self, Sakkaya Ditthi. These 5 aggregates together, which we popularly call a being, are dukkha itself. There is no other being or I standing behind these 5 aggregates who experiences dukkha. As Buddhaghosa says, "Mere suffering exists, but no sufferer is found. The deed are, but no doer is found. There is no unmoving mover behind the movement. It is only movement." It is not correct to say that life is moving, but life is movement itself. Life and movement are not 2 different things. In other words, there is no thinker behind the thought. Thought itself is the thinker. If you remove the thought, there is no thinker to be found. Here we cannot fail to notice how this Buddhist view is diametrically opposed to the Cartesian cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Now, a question may be raised whether life has a beginning. According to the Buddhist teaching, the beginning of the life stream of living beings is unthinkable. The believer in the creation of life by God may be astonished at this reply. But if you were to ask him, "What is the beginning of God?" he would answer without hesitation, "God has no beginning," and he is not astonished at his own reply. The Buddha says, "O bhikkhus, this cycle of continuity, samsara, is without a visible end, and the first beginning of beings wandering and running round, enveloped in ignorance, avijja, and bound down by the fetters of thirst, desire, tanha, is not to be perceived. And further, referring to ignorance, which is the main cause of the continuity of life, the Buddha states, "The first beginning of ignorance is not to be perceived, in such a way as to postulate that there was no ignorance beyond a certain point. Thus, it is not possible to say that there was no life beyond a certain definite point." This, in short, is the meaning of the noble truth of dukkha. It is extremely important to understand this first noble truth clearly because, as the Buddha says, "He who sees dukkha sees also the arising of dukkha, sees also the cessation of dukkha, and sees also the path leading to the cessation of dukkha." This does not at all make the life of a Buddhist melancholy or sorrowful, as some people wrongly imagine. On the contrary, a true Buddhist is the happiest of beings. He has no fears or anxieties. He is always calm and serene, and cannot be upset or dismayed by changes or calamities, because he sees things as they are. The Buddha was never melancholy or gloomy. He was described by his contemporaries as ever smiling. In Buddhist painting and sculpture, the Buddha is always represented with a countenance happy, serene, contented, and compassionate. Never a trace of suffering or agony or pain is to be seen. Buddhist art and architecture, Buddhist temples never give the impression of gloom or sorrow, but produce an atmosphere of calm and serene joy. Although there is suffering in life, a Buddhist should not be gloomy over it, should not be angry or impatient at it. One of the principal evils in life, according to Buddhism, is repugnance or hatred. Repugnance is explained as ill will with regard to living beings, with regard to suffering, and with regard to things pertaining to suffering. Its function is to produce a basis for unhappy states and bad conduct. Thus, it is wrong to be impatient at suffering. Being impatient or angry at suffering does not remove it. On the contrary, it adds a little more to one's troubles and aggravates and exacerbates a situation already disagreeable. What is necessary is not anger or impatience, but the understanding of the question of suffering, how it comes about, and how to get rid of it, and then to work accordingly, with patience, intelligence, determination, and energy. There are two ancient Buddhist texts called the Therigatha and Therigata, which are full of the joyful utterances of the Buddha's disciples, both male and female, who found peace and happiness in life through his teaching. The king of Kosala once told the Buddha that unlike many a disciple of other religious systems who looked haggard, coarse, pale, emaciated, and unprepossessing, his disciples were joyful and elated, jubilant and exultant, enjoying the spiritual life, with faculties pleased, free from anxiety, serene, peaceful, and living with a gazelle's mind, i.e., light-hearted. The king added that he believed that this healthy disposition was due to the fact that these venerable ones had certainly realized the great and full significance of the Blessed One's teaching. Buddhism is quite opposed to the melancholic, sorrowful, penitent, and gloomy attitude of mind, which is considered a hindrance to the realization of truth. On the other hand, it is interesting to remember here that joy is one of the 7 bojjhangas, or factors of enlightenment, the essential qualities to be cultivated for the realization of nirvana. Chapter 0.3, the second noble truth, samudaya, the arising of dukkha. The second noble truth is that of the arising or origin of dukkha, dukkha samudaya, driya sakha, the most polar and well-known definition of the dukkha. Second truth, as found in innumerable places in the original texts, as follows. It is this thirst, craving, tanha, which produces re-existence and re-becoming, ponobhavika, and which is bound up with passionate greed, nandirgasahagata, namely, 1. Thirst for sense pleasures, kamatanha, 2. Thirst for non-existence, self-annihilation, vibhavatanha. It is this thirst, desire, greed, craving, manifesting itself in various ways that gives rise to all forms of suffering and the continuity of beings. But it should not be taken as the first cause, for there is no first cause possible, as, according to Buddhism, everything is relative and interdependent. Even this thirst, tanha, which is considered as the cause or origin of dukkha, depends for its arising, samudaya, on something else, which is sensation, vedana, and sensation arises depending on contact, phassa, and so on and so forth goes on the circle which is known as conditioned genesis, paticca samuppada, which we will discuss later. So tanha, thirst, is not the first or the only cause of the arising of dukkha, but it is the most palpable and immediate cause, the principal thing and the all-pervading thing. Hence, in certain places of the original Pali texts themselves, the definition of samudaya of the origin of dukkha includes other defilements and impurities, kilyasa, sasavadhamma, in addition to tanha, thirst, which is always given the first place. Within the necessarily limited space of our discussion, it will be sufficient if we remember that this thirst has as its center the false idea of self arising out of ignorance. Here, the term thirst includes not only desire for and attachment to sense leisure, wealth, and power, but also desire for and attachment to ideas and ideals, views, opinions, theories, conceptions, and beliefs. Dhammatanha. According to the Buddha's analysis, all the troubles and strife in the world, from little personal quarrels in families to great wars between nations and countries, arise out of this selfish thirst. From this point of view, all economic, political, and social problems are rooted in this selfish thirst. Great statesmen who try to settle international disputes and talk of war and peace only in economic and political terms touch the superficialities and never go deep into the real root of the problem. As the Buddha told Ratapala, the world lacks and hankers and is enslaved to thirst, harusu. Everyone will admit that all the evils in the world are produced by selfish desire. This is not difficult to understand. But how this desire, thirst, can produce re-existence and re-becoming, ponobhavika, is a problem not so easy to grasp. It is here that we have to discuss the deeper philosophical side of the second noble truth, corresponding to the philosophical side of the first noble truth. Here we must have some idea about the theory of karma and rebirth. There are 4 nutriments: ahara, in the sense of cause or condition, necessary for the existence and continuity of beings. 1. Ordinary material food. 2. Contact of our sense organs with the external world. 3. Consciousness. And 4. Mental volition or will. Of these 4, the last mentioned, mental volition, is the will to live, to exist, to continue, to become more and more. It creates the root of existence and continuity, striving forward by way of good and bad actions, kusala kusalakama. It is the same as volition, kusala kusalakama. We have seen earlier that volition is karma, as the Buddha himself has defined it. Referring to mental volition just mentioned above, the Buddha says, when one understands the nutriment of mental volition, one understands the 3 forms of thirst, tanha. Thus, the terms thirst, volition, mental volition, and karma all denote the same thing. They devote the desire, the will to be, to exist, to re-exist, to become more and more, to grow more and more, to accumulate more and more. This is the cause of the arising of dukkha, and this is found within the aggregate of mental formations, one of the 5 aggregates, which constitute a being. Here is one of the most important and essential points in the Buddha's teaching. We must therefore clearly and carefully mark and remember that the cause, the germ, of the arising of dukkha is within dukkha itself, and not outside. And we must equally well remember that the cause, the germ, of the cessation of dukkha, of the destruction of dukkha, is also within dukkha itself, and not outside. This is what is meant by the well-known formula often found in original Pali texts. Yam kinchi samudaya dhammam sabam, nir odad dhammam. Whatever is of the nature of arising, all that is of the nature of cessation. A being, a thing, of a system, if it has also within itself the nature of arising, the nature of coming into being, has also within itself the nature, the germ, of its own cessation and destruction. Thus, dukkha, 5 aggregates, has within itself the nature of its own arising, and has also within itself the nature of its own cessation. This point will be taken up again in the discussion of the third noble truth, nirodha. Now, the Pali word kama, or the Sanskrit word karma, from the root kra, to do, literally means action, doing. But in the Buddhist theory of karma, it has a specific meaning. It means only volitional action, not all action. Nor does it mean the result of karma, as many people wrongly and loosely use it. In Buddhist terminology, karma, it has a specific meaning. It means only volitional action, not all action. Not does it mean the result of karma as many people wrongly and loosely use it. In Buddhist terminology, karma never means its effect. Its effect is known as the fruit or the result of karma, kamma phala or kamma vipaka. Volition may relatively be good or bad, just as a desire may relatively be good or bad. So karma may be good or bad relatively. Good karma, kusala, produces good effects, and bad karma, akusala, produces bad effects. Thirst, volition, karma, whether good or bad, has one force as its effect. Force to continue in a good or bad direction. Whether good or bad, it is relative, and is within the cycle of continuity, samsara. An arahant, though he acts, does not accumulate karma, because he is free from the thirst for continuity and becoming, free from all other defilement and impurities, kilesa, sasavadhamma. For him there is no rebirth. The theory of karma should not be confused with so-called moral justice or reward and punishment. The idea of moral justice or reward and punishment arises out of the conception of a supreme being, a God, who sits in judgment, who is a lawgiver and who decides what is right and wrong. The term justice is ambiguous and dangerous, and in its name more harm than good is done to humanity. The theory of karma is the theory of cause and effect, of action and reaction. It is a natural law, which has nothing to do with the idea of justice or reward and punishment. Every volitional action produces its effects or results. If a good action produces good effects and a bad action bad effects, it is not justice or reward or punishment meted out by anybody or any power sitting in judgment on your action. But this is in virtue of its own nature, its own law. This is not difficult to understand. But what is difficult is that, according to the karma theory, the effects of a volitional action may continue to manifest themselves even in a life after death. Here we have to explain what death is according to Buddhism. We have seen earlier that a being is nothing but a combination of physical and mental forces or energies. What we call death is the total non-functioning of the physical body. Do all these forces and energies stop altogether with the non-functioning of the body? Buddhism says no. Will, volition, desire, thirst to exist, to continue, to become more and more, is a tremendous force that moves whole world lives, whole existences, that even moves the whole world. According to Buddhism, this force does not stop with the non-functioning of the body, which is death, but it continues manifesting itself in another form, producing re-existence, which is called rebirth. Now, another question arises. If there is no permanent, unchanging entity or substance like self or soul, Atman, what is it that can re-exist or be reborn after death? Before we go on life after death, let us consider what this life is and how it continues now. What we call life, as we have so often repeated, is the combination of the five aggregates, a combination of physical and mental energies. These are constantly changing. They do not remain the same for 2 consecutive moments. Every moment they are born and they die. When the aggregates arise, decay and die, O bhikkhu. Every moment you are born, decay and die. Thus, even now during this lifetime, every moment we are born and die, but we continue. If we can understand that in this life we can continue without a permanent, unchanging substance like self or soul, why can't we understand that those forces themselves can continue without a self or soul behind them after the non-functioning of the body? When this physical body is no more capable of functioning, energies do not die with it, but continue to take some other shape or form, which we call another life. In a child, all the physical, mental, and intellectual faculties are tender and weak, but they have within them the potentiality of producing a full-grown man. Physical and mental energies, which constitute the so-called being, have within themselves the power to take a new form, grow gradually and gather force to the full. As there is no permanent, uncahanging substance, nothing passes from one moment to the next. So quite obviously, nothing permanent or unchanging can pass or transmigrate from one life to the next. It is a series that continues unbroken, but changes every moment. The series is, really speaking, nothing but movement. It is like a flame that burns through the night. It is not the same flame, nor is it another. A child grows up to be a man of 60. Certainly the man of 60 is not the same as the child of 60 years ago. nor is he another person. Similarly, a man dies here and reborn elsewhere is neither the same person nor another. It is the continuity of the same series. The difference between death and birth is only a thought moment. The last thought moment of this life conditions the first thought moment in the so-called next life, which in fact is the continuity of the same series. During the life itself, too, one thought moment conditions the next thought moment. So, from the Buddhist point of view, the question of life after death is not a great mystery, and a Buddhist is never worried about this problem. As long as there is this thirst to be and to become, the cycle of continuity, samara, goes on. It can stop only when its driving force, this thirst, is cut off through wisdom, which sees reality, truth, nirvana. Chapter 4. The Third Noble Truth. Nirodha, the cessation of dukkha. The third noble truth is that there is emancipation, liberation, freedom from the continuity of dukkha. This is called the noble truth of cessation of dukkha, which is nibbana, more popularly known in its Sanskrit form of nirvana. To eliminate dukkha completely, one has to eliminate the main root of dukkha, which is thirst, as we saw earlier. Therefore, nirvana is known also by the term tanhakaya, extinction of thirst. Now you will ask, but what is nirvana? Volumes have been written in reply to this quite natural and simple question. They have, more and more, only confused the issue rather than clarified it. The only reasonable reply to give to the question is that it can never be answered completely and satisfactorily in words, because human language is too poor to express the real nature of the absolute truth or ultimate reality, which is nirvana. Language is created and used by masses of human beings to express things and ideas experienced by their sense organs and their mind. A supra-mundane experience like that of the absolute truth is not of such a category. Therefore, there cannot be words to express that experience, just as the fish had no words in his vocabulary to express the nature of solid land. The tortoise told to his friend the fish that he, tortoise, just returned to the lake after a walk on the land. "Of course," the fish said, "you mean swimming." The tortoise tried to explain the one couldn't swim on the land, that it was solid and that one walked on it, but the fish insisted that there could be nothing like it, that it must be liquid like his lake, with waves, and that one must be able to dive and swim there. Words are symbols representing things and ideas known to us, and these symbols do not and cannot convey the true nature of even ordinary things. Language is considered deceptive and misleading in the matter of understanding of the truth. So the Lankavatara Sutra says that ignorant people get stuck in words like an elephant in the mud. Nevertheless, we cannot do without language. But if nirvana is to be expressed and explained in positive terms, we are likely immediately to grasp an idea associated with those terms, which may be quite the contrary. Therefore, it is generally expressed in negative terms, a less dangerous mode, perhaps. So it is often referred to by such negative terms as tanhakaya, extinction of thirst, asamkhata, uncompound, unconditioned, viraga, absence of desire, nirodha, cessation, nibbana, blowing out of, or extinction. Let us consider a few definitions and descriptions of nirvana as found in the original Pali texts. It is the complete cessation of that very thirst, giving it up, renouncing it, emancipation from it, detachment from it, calming of all conditioned things, giving up of all defilements, extinction of thirst, detachment, cessation, nibbana. O bhikkhus, what is the absolute, asamkhata, unconditioned? It is, O bhikkhus, the extinction of desire, the extinction of hatred, the extinction of illusion. This, O bhikkhus, is called the absolute. O Radha, the extinction of thirst is nibbana. O bhikkhus, whatever there may be things, conditioned or unconditioned, among them detachment is the highest. This is to say, freedom from conceit, destruction of thirst, the uprooting of attachment, the cutting off of continuity, the extinction of thirst, detachment, cessation, nibbana. The reply of Sariputta, the chief disciple of the Buddha, to a direct question, what is nibbana, posed by a parivrajaka, is identical with the definition of asamkhata given by the Buddha. Above, the extinction of desire, the extinction of hatred, the extinction of illusion, the abandoning and destruction of desire and craving for these 5 aggregates of attachment. That is the cessation of dukkha. The cessation of continuity and becoming is nibbana. And further, referring to nirvana, the Buddha says, "O bhikkhus, there is unborn, ungrown, and unconditioned. Were there not the unborn, ungrown, and unconditioned, there would be no escape for the born, grown, and conditioned. Since there is the unborn, ungrown, and unconditioned, so there is escape for the born, grown, and conditioned." Here the 4 elements of solidity, fluidity, heat, and motion have no place. The notions of length and breadth, the subtle and the gross, good and evil, name and form are altogether destroyed. Neither this world nor the other, nor coming, going, or standing, neither death nor birth nor sense objects are to be found. Because nirvana is thus expressed in negative terms, there are many who have got a wrong notion that it is negative and expresses self-annihilation. Nirvana is definitely no annihilation of self, because there is no self to annihilate. If at all, it is the annihilation of the illusion, of the false idea of self. It is incorrect to say that nirvana is negative or positive. The idea of negative and positive are relative and are within the realm of duality. These terms cannot be applied to nirvana, absolute truth, which is beyond duality and relativity. A negative word need not necessarily indicate a negative state. The Pali or Sanskrit word for health is arogya, a negative term, which literally means absence of illness. But arogya, health, does not represent a negative state. The word immortal, or its Sanskrit equivalent, amrata or Pali amata, which also is a synonym for nirvana, is negative, but it does not denote a negative state. The negation of negative values is not negative. One of the well-known synonyms for nirvana is freedom, Pali mutti, skatit, mutti. Nobody would say that freedom is negative, but even freedom has a negative side. Freedom is always a liberation from something which is obstructive, which is evil, which is negative, but freedom is not negative. So nirvana, mutti or vimutti, the absolute freedom, is freedom from all evil, freedom from craving, hatred, and ignorance, freedom from all terms of duality, relativity, time, and space. We may get some idea of nirvana as absolute truth from the Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta, No. 0.14 of the Majjhima Nikaya. This extremely important discourse was delivered by the Buddha to Pukusati, already mentioned, whom the master found to be intelligent and earnest, of the relevant portions of the night in a potter's shed. The essence of the relevant portions of the sutta is as follows. A man is composed of 6 elements: solidity, fluidity, heat, motion, space, and consciousness. He analyses them and finds that none of them is mine or me or myself. He understands how consciousness appears and disappears, how pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral sensations appears and disappears. Through this knowledge, his mind becomes detached. Then he finds within him a pure equanimity, upaka, which he can direct towards the attainment of any high spiritual state, and he knows that thus this pure equanimity will last for a long period. But then he thinks, if I focus this purified and cleansed equanimity on the sphere of infinite space and develop a mind conforming thereto, that is a mental creation, samkatan. If I focus this purified and cleansed equanimity on the sphere of infinite consciousness, on the sphere of nothingness, or on the sphere of neither perception nor perception, and develop a mind conforming thereto, that is a mental creation. Then he neither mentally creates nor wills continuity and becoming, bhava or annihilation, vaibhava. As he does not construct or does not cling to anything in the world, as he does not cling, he is not anxious. As he is not anxious, he is completely calmed within, fully pakadam yeva parinibhayati. And he knows, finished his birth, lived his pure life, what should be done is done, nothing more is left to be done. Now when he experiences a pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral sensation, he knows that it is impermanent, that it does not bind him, that it is not experienced with passion. Whatever may be the sensation, he experiences it without being bound to it. Visamyuto. He knows that all those sensations will be pacified with the dissolution of the body, just as the flame of a lamp goes out when oil and wick give out. Therefore, O bhikkhu, a person so endowed is endowed with the absolute wisdom, for the knowledge of the extinction of all dukkha is the absolute noble wisdom. This is deliverance, founded on truth, is unshakable. O bhikkhu, that which is unreality, mosadhamma, is false. That which is reality, mosadhamma, nibbana, is truth, sakka. Therefore, O bhikkhu, that person so endowed is endowed with this absolute truth. For the absolute noble truth, paramariya sakkam, is nibbana, which is reality. Elsewhere, the Buddha unequivocally uses the word truth in place of nibbana. I will teach you the truth and the path leading to the truth. Here, truth definitely means nirvana. Now, what is absolute truth? According to Buddhism, the absolute truth is that there is nothing absolute in the world, that everything is relative, conditioned, and impermanent, and that there is no unchanging, everlasting, absolute substance like self, soul, or Atman, within or without. This is the absolute truth. Truth is never negative, though there is a popular expression as negative truth. The realization of this truth, i.e., to see things as they are without illusion or ignorance, is the extinction of craving, thirst, and the cessation, nirodha, of dukkha, which is nirvana. It is interesting and useful to remember here the Mahayana view of nirvana as not being different from samsara. The same thing is samsara, or nirvana, according to the way you look at it, subjectively or objectively. This Mahayana view was probably developed out of the ideas found in the original Theravada Pali texts, to which we have just referred in our brief discussion. It is incorrect to think that nirvana is the natural result of the extinction of craving. Nirvana is not the result of anything. If it would be a result, then it would be an effect produced by a cause. It would be samkhata produced and conditioned. Truth is not a result nor an effect. It is not produced like a mystic spiritual mental state, such as dhyana or samadhi. Truth is, nirvana is. The only thing you can do is to see it, to realize it. There is a path leading to the realization of nirvana, but the nirvana is not the result of this path. You may get to the mountain along a path, but the mountain is not the result, not an effect of the path. You may see a light, but the light is not the result of your eyesight. People often ask, what is there after nirvana? This question cannot arise, because nirvana is the ultimate truth. If it is ultimate, there can be nothing after it. If there is anything after nirvana, then that will be the ultimate truth, and not nirvana. A monk named Radha put this question to the Buddha in a different form. For what purpose or end is nirvana? This question presupposes something after nirvana when it postulates some purpose or end for it. So the Buddha answered, O Radha, this question could not catch its limit, i.e., it is beside the point. One lives the holy life with nirvana as its final plunge into the absolute truth, as its goal, as its ultimate end. Some popular inaccurately phrased expressions like the Buddha entered into nirvana or parinirvana after his death have given rise to many imaginary speculations about nirvana. The moment you hear the phrase that the Buddha entered into nirvana or parinirvana, you take nirvana to be a state or a realm or a position in which there is some sort of existence and try to imagine it in terms of the senses of the word existence as it is known to you. This popular expression, entered into nirvana, has no equivalent in the original texts. There is no such thing as entering into nirvana after death. There is a word parinabhuto used to denote the death of the Buddha or an arahant who has realized nirvana, but it does not mean entering into nirvana. Parinabhuto simply means fully passed away, fully blown out, or fully extinct, because the Buddha or arahant has no re-existence after his death. Now, another question arises. What happens to Buddha or an arahant after his death, parinirvana? This comes under the category of unanswered questions, abhyakata. Even when the Buddha spoke about this, he indicated that no words in our vocabulary could express what happens to an arahant after his death. In reply to a parivrajaka named Vaka, the Buddha said that terms like born or not born do not apply in the case of an arahant, because those things matter, sensation, perception, mental activities, consciousness, with which the terms like born and not born are associated, are completely destroyed and uprooted, never to rise again after his death. An arahant after his death is often compared to a fire gone out when the supply of wood is over, or to the flame of a lamp gone out when the wick and oil are finished. Here it should be clearly and distinctly understood without any confusion that what is compared to a flame or a fire gone out is not nirvana, but the being composed of the 5 aggregates who realized nirvana. This point has to be emphasized because many people, even some great scholars, have misunderstood and misinterpreted this simile as referring to nirvana. Nirvana is never compared to a fire or a lamp gone out. There is another popular question: if there is no self, no Atman, who realizes nirvana? Before we go on to nirvana, let us ask the question, who thinks now if there is no self? We have seen earlier that it is the thought that thinks, that there is no thinker behind the thought. In the same way, it is wisdom, panna, realization, that realizes. There is no other self behind the realization. In the discussion of the origin of dukkha, we saw that, whatever it may be, whether being or thing or system, if it is of the nature of arising, it has within itself the nature, the germ of its cessation, its destruction. Now, dukkha, samsara, the cycle of continuity, is of the nature of arising. It must also be of the nature of cessation. Dukkha arises because of thirst, tanha, and it ceases because of wisdom. Thirst and wisdom are both within the 5 aggregates, as we saw earlier. Thus, the germ of their arising as well as that of their cessation are both within the 5 aggregates. This is the real meaning of the Buddha's well-known statement: within this fathom-long sentient body itself, I postulate the world, the arising of the world, the cessation of the world, and the path leading to the cessation of the world. This means that all the 4 noble truths are found within the 5 aggregates, i.e. within ourselves. Here, the word world, loka, is used in place of dukkha. This also means that there is no external power that produces the arising and the cessation of dukkha. When wisdom is developed and cultivated according to the 4th noble truth, the next to be taken up, it sees the secret of life, the reality of things as they are. When the secret is discovered, when the truth is seen, all the forces which feverishly produce the continuity of samsara in illusion become calm and incapable of producing any more karma formations, because there is no more illusion, no more thirst for continuity. It is like a mental disease which is cured when the cause or the secret of the malady is discovered and seen by the patient. In almost all religions, the summum bonum can be attained only after death, but nirvana can be realized in this very life. It is not necessary to wait till you die to attain it. He who has realized the truth, nirvana, is the happiest being in the world. He is free from all complexes and obsessions, the worries and troubles that torment others. His mental health is perfect. He does not repent the past, nor does he brood over the future. He lives fully in the present. Therefore, he appreciates and enjoys things in the purest sense, without self-projections. He is joyful, exultant, enjoying the pure life, his faculties pleased, free from anxiety, serene and peaceful. As he is free from selfish desire, hatred, ignorance, conceit, pride, and all such defilements, he is pure and gentle, full of universal love, compassion, kindness, sympathy, understanding, and tolerance. His service to others is of the purest, for he has no thought of self. He gains nothing, accumulates nothing, not even anything spiritual, because he is free from the illusion of self and the thirst for becoming. Nirvana is beyond all terms of duality and relativity. It is therefore beyond our conceptions of good and evil, right and wrong, existence and non-existence. Even the word happiness, sukha, which is used to describe nirvana, has an entirely different sense here. Sariputta once said, "O friend, nirvana is happiness." "Nirvana is happiness?" then Udayi asked. "But friend Sariputta, what happiness can it be if there is no sensation?" Sariputta's reply was highly philosophical and beyond ordinary comprehension. That there is no sensation itself is happiness. Nirvana is beyond logic and reasoning. However much we may engage, often as a vain intellectual pastime, in highly speculative discussions regarding nirvana or ultimate truth or reality, we shall never understand it that way. A child in the kindergarten should not quarrel about the theory of relativity. Instead, if he follows his studies patiently and diligently, one day he may understand it. Nirvana is to be realized by the wise within themselves. If we follow the path patiently and with diligence, train and purify ourselves earnestly, and attain the necessary spiritual development, we may one day realize it within ourselves, without taxing ourselves with puzzling and high-sounding words. Let us therefore now turn to the path which leads to the realization of nirvana. Chapter 0.5, the Fourth Noble Truth, Magga, the Path. The fourth noble truth is that of the way leading to the cessation of dukkha. This is known as the middle path because it avoids two extremes, one extreme being the search for happiness through the pleasures of the senses, which is low, common, unprofitable, and the way of the ordinary people, the other being the search for happiness through self-mortification in different forms of asceticism, which is painful, unworthy, and unprofitable. Having himself first tried these two extremes, and having found them to be useless, the Buddha discovered through personal experience the middle path, which gives vision and knowledge, which leads to calm, insight, enlightenment, nirvana. This middle path is generally referred to as the Noble Eightfold Path, Arya Atangika Magga, because it is composed of 8 categories or divisions, namely 1. Rights, understanding samadhitta. 2. Right thought, sama sankappa. 3. Right speech, samavaka. 4. Right action, samakamanta. 5. Right livelihood, sama ajiva. 6. Right effort, sama vayama. 7. Right mindfulness, sama sati. 8. Right concentration, sama samadhi. Practically the whole teaching of the Buddha, to which he devoted himself during 45 years, deals in some way or other with this path. He explained it in different ways and in different words to different people according to the stage of their development and their capacity to understand and follow him. But the essence of those many thousand discourses scattered in the Buddhist scriptures is found in the Noble Eightfold Path. It should not be thought that the 8 categories or divisions of the path should be followed and practiced one after the other in the numerical order as given in the usual list above, but they are to be developed more or less simultaneously, as far as possible according to the capacity of each individual. They are all linked together, and each helps the cultivation of the others. These 8 factors aim at promoting and perfecting the 3 essentials of Buddhist training and discipline, namely, A. Ethical conduct, sila, mental discipline, samadhi, and it will therefore be more helpful for a coherent and better understanding of the 8 divisions of the path if we group them and explain them according to these 3 heads. Ethical conduct, sila, is built on the vast conception of universal love and compassion for all living beings on which the Buddha's teaching is based. It is regrettable that many scholars forget this great ideal of the Buddha's teaching and indulge in only dry philosophical and metaphysical divagations when they talk and write about Buddhism. The Buddha gave his teaching for the good of the many, for the happiness of the many, out of compassion for the world. According to Buddhism, for a man to be perfect, there are 2 qualities that he should develop equally: compassion, karuna, on one side, and wisdom, panna, on the other. Here compassion represents love, charity, kindness, tolerance, and such noble qualities on the emotional side, or qualities of the heart, while wisdom would stand for the intellectual side, or the qualities of the mind. If one develops only the emotional, neglecting the intellectual, one may become a goof-hearted fool, while to develop only the intellectual side, neglecting the emotional, may turn one into a hard-hearted intellect without feeling for others. Therefore, to be perfect, one has to develop both equally. That is the aim of the Buddhist way of life. In it, wisdom and compassion are inseparably linked together, as we shall see later. Now, in ethical conduct, sila, based on love and compassion, are included 3 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, namely right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Note 3, 4, and 5 in the list. Right speech means abstention, 1, from telling lies, 2, from backbiting and slander and talk that may bring about hatred, enmity, disunity, and disharmony among individuals or groups of people, 3, from harsh, rude, impolite, malicious, and abusive language, and 4, from idle, useless, and foolish babble and gossip. When one abstains from these forms of wrong and harmful speech, one naturally has to speak the truth, has to use words that are friendly and benevolent, pleasant and gentle, meaningful and useful. One should not speak carelessly. Speech should be at the right time and place. If one cannot say something useful, one should keep noble silence. Right action aims at promoting moral, honorable, and peaceful conduct. It admonishes us that we should abstain from destroying life, from stealing, from dishonest dealings, from illegitimate sexual intercourse, and that we should also help others to lead a peaceful and honorable life in the right way. Right livelihood means that one should abstain from making one's living through a profession that brings harm to others, such as trading in arms and lethal weapons, intoxicating drinks, poisons, killing animals, cheating, etc., and should live by a profession which is honorable, blameless, and innocent of harm to others. One can clearly see here that Buddhism is strongly opposed to any kind of war when it lays down that trade in arms and lethal weapons is an evil and unjust means of livelihood. These three factors, right speech, right action, and right livelihood, of the Eightfold Path constitute ethical conduct. It should be realized that the Buddhist ethical and moral conduct aims at promoting a happy and harmonious life both for the individual and for society. This moral conduct is considered as the indispensable foundation for all higher spiritual attainments. No spiritual development is possible without this moral basis. Next comes mental discipline, in which are included three other factors of the Eightfold Path, namely right effort, right mindfulness or attentiveness, and right concentration, Nos. 67 and 8 in the list. Right effort is the energetic will, 1, to prevent evil and unwholesome states of mind from arising, and 2, to get rid of such evil and unwholesome states that have already arisen within a man, and also 3, to produce, to cause to arise, good and wholesome states of mind not yet arisen, and 4, to develop and bring to perfection the good and wholesome states of mind already present in man. Right mindfulness or attentiveness is to be diligently aware, mindful and attentive with regard to 1, the activities of the body, kaya, 2, sensations or feelings, vedana, 3, the activities of the mind, citta, and 4, ideas, thoughts, conception, and things, dhamma. The practice of concentration on breathing, anapanasati, is one of the well-known exercises connected with the body for mental development. There are several other ways of developing attentiveness in relation to the body as modes of meditation. With regard to sensations and feelings, one should be clearly aware of all forms of feelings and sensations, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, of how they appear and disappear within oneself. Concerning the activities of mind, one should be aware whether one's mind is lustful or not, given to hatred or not, deluded or not, distracted or concentrated, etc. In this way, one should be aware of all movements of mind, how they arise and disappear. As regards ideas, thoughts, conceptions, and things, one should know their nature, how they appear and disappear, how they are developed, how they are suppressed and destroyed, and so on. These 4 forms of mental culture or meditation are treated in detail in the Satipatthana Sutta, setting up of mind. The third and last factor of mental discipline is right concentration, leading to the 4 stages of dhyana, generally called trance or recueillement. In the first stage of dhyana, passionate desires and certain unwholesome thoughts like sensuous lust, ill will, languor, worry, restlessness, and skeptical doubt are discarded, and feeling of joy and happiness are maintained, along with certain mental activities. In the second stage, all intellectual activities are suppressed. Tranquility and one-pointedness of mind develop, and the feelings of joy and happiness are still retained. In the third stage, the feeling of joy, which is an active sensation, also disappears, while the disposition of happiness still remains in addition to mindful equanimity. In the fourth stage of dhyana, all sensations, even of happiness and unhappiness, of joy and sorrow, disappear, only pure equanimity and awareness remaining. Thus, the mind is trained and disciplined and developed through right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. The remaining 2 factors, namely right thought and right understanding, go to constitute wisdom. Right thought denotes the thoughts of selfless renunciation or detachment, thoughts of love and thoughts of nonviolence, which are extended to all being. It is very interesting and important to note here that thoughts of selfless detachments, love and nonviolence, are grouped on the side of wisdom. This clearly shows that true wisdom is endowed with these noble qualities, and that all thoughts of selfish desire, ill will, hatred, and violence are the result of a lack of wisdom in all spheres of life, whether individual, social, or political. Right understanding is the understanding of things as they are, and it is the Four Noble Truths that explain things as they really are. Right understanding, therefore, is ultimately reduced to the understanding of the Four Noble Truths. This understanding is the highest wisdom, which sees the ultimate reality. According to Buddhism, there are two sorts of understanding. What we generally call understanding is knowledge, an accumulated memory, an intellectual grasping of a subject according to certain given data. This is called knowing accordingly, anubbodha. It is not very deep. Real deep understanding is called penetration, pativeda, seeing a thing in its true nature, without name and label. This penetration is possible only when the mind is free from all impurities and is fully developed, though meditation. From this brief account of the path, one may see that it is a way of life to be followed, practiced, and developed by each individual. It is self-disciple in body, word, and mind, self-development and self-purification. It has nothing to do with belief, prayer, worship, or ceremony. In that sense, it has nothing which may popularly be called religious. It is a path leading to the realization of ultimate reality, to complete freedom, happiness, and peace, through moral, spiritual, and intellectual perfection. In Buddhist countries, there are simple and beautiful customs and ceremonies on religious occasions. They have little to do with the real path, but they have their value in satisfying certain religious emotions and the needs of those who are less advanced, and helping them gradually along the path. With regard to the Four Noble Truths, we have four functions to perform. The first noble truth is dukkha, the nature of life, its suffering, its sorrows and joys, its imperfection and unsatisfactoriness, its impermanence and insubstantiality. With regard to this, our function is to understand it as a fact, clearly and completely, parineya. The second noble truth is the origin of dukkha, which is desire, thirst, accompanied by all other passions, defilements, and impurities. A mere understanding of this fact is not sufficient. Here, our function is to discard it, to eliminate, to destroy, and eradicate it, pahatava. The third noble truth is the cessation of dukkha, nirvana, the absolute truth, the ultimate reality. Here, our function is to realize it, sakacikabha. The fourth noble truth is the path leading to the realization of nirvana. A mere knowledge of the path, however complete, will not do. In this case, our function is to follow it and keep to it, bhavadabha. Chapter 0.6. The Doctrine of No Soul, Anatta. What, in general, is suggested by soul, self, ego, or to use the Sanskrit expression atman, is that in man there is a permanent, everlasting, and absolute entity, which is the unchanging substance behind the changing phenomenal world. According to some religions, each individual has such a separate soul which is created by God, and which, finally after death, lives eternally either in hell or heaven, its destiny depending on the judgment of its creator. According to others, it goes through many lives till it is completely purified and becomes finally united with God or Brahman, universal soul or Atman, from which it originally emanated. This soul or self in man is the thinker of thoughts, feeler of sensations, and receiver of rewards and punishments for all its actions, good and bad. Such a conception is called the idea of self. Buddhism stands unique in the history of human thought in denying the existence of such a soul, self, or Atman. According to the teaching of the Buddha, the idea of self is an imaginary, false belief which has no corresponding reality, and it produces harmful thoughts of me and mine, selfish desire, craving, attachment, hatred, ill will, conceit, pride, egoism, and other defilements, impurities, and problems. It is the source of all the troubles in the world, from personal conflicts to wars between nations. In short, to this view can be traced all the evil in the world. Two ideas are psychologically deep-rooted in man: self-protection and self-preservation. For self-protection, man has created God, on whom he depends for his own protection, safety, and security, just as a child depends on its parent. For self-preservation, man has conceived the idea of an immortal soul, or Atman, which will live eternally. In his ignorance, weakness, fear, and desire, man needs these two things to console himself. Hence, he clings to them deeply and fanatically. The Buddhist teaching does not support this ignorance, weakness, fear, and desire, but aims at making man enlightened by removing and destroying them, striking at their very root. According to Buddhism, our ideas of God and soul are false and empty. Though highly developed as theories, they are all the same, extremely subtle mental projections, garbed in an intricate metaphysical and philosophical phraseology. These ideas are so deep-rooted in man and so near and dear to him that he does not wish to hear, nor does he want to understand, any teaching against them. The Buddha knew this quite well. In fact, he said that his teaching was against the current, against man's selfish desires. Just 4 weeks after his enlightenment, seated under a banyan tree, he thought to himself, "I have realized this truth which is deep, difficult to see, difficult to understand, comprehensible only by the wise. Men who are overpowered by passions and surrounded by a mass of darkness cannot see this truth, which is against the current, which is lofty, deep, subtle, and hard to comprehend." With these thoughts in his mind, the Buddha hesitated for a moment, whether it would not be in vain if he tried to explain to the world the truth he had just realized. Then he compared the world to a lotus pond. In a lotus pond, there are some lotuses still under water. There are others which have risen only up to the water level. There are still others which stand above water and are untouched by it. In the same way in this world, there are men at different levels of developments. Some would understand the truth, so the Buddha decided to teach it. The doctrine of anatta, or no soul, is the natural result of, or the corollary to, the analysis of the 5 aggregates and the teaching of conditioned genesis, paticasmupada. We have seen earlier, in the discussion of the first noble truth, dukkha, that what we call a being or an individual is composed, or the 5 aggregates, and that when these are analyzed and examined, there is nothing behind them which can be taken as I, Atman, or self, or any unchanging abiding substance. That is the analytical method. The same result is arrived at through the doctrine of conditioned genesis, which is the synthetical method. And according to this, nothing in the world is absolute. Everything is conditioned, relative, and interdependent. This is the Buddhist theory of relativity. Before we go into the question of anatta proper, it is useful to have a brief idea of the conditioned genesis. The principle of this doctrine is given in a short formula of 4 lines. When this is that is, imazami sati idam hoti. This arising, that arises, imasapada idam upajati. When this is not, that is not, imasa idam na hoti. This ceasing, that ceases, imasa nirota idam nirujati. On this principle of conditionality, relativity, and interdependence, the whole existence and continuity of life and its cessation are explained in a detailed formula which is called paticcasamuppada, conditioned genesis, consisting of 12 factors. 1. Through ignorance are conditioned volitional actions or karma formations, avijjapachuya samkara. 2. Through volitional action is conditioned consciousness, samkara pachaya vinanam. 3. Through consciousness are conditioned mental and physical phenomena, vinanapakaya namarupam. 4. Through mental and physical phenomena are conditioned the 6 faculties, i.e. 5 physical, sense, organs, and mind, namarupa pachaisalaitanam. 5. Through the 6 faculties is conditioned sensorial and mental contact, salayatana pakaya faso. 6. Through sensorial and mental contact is conditioned sensation, fasavajaya vedana. 7. Through sensation is conditioned desire, thirst, vedan pakchaya tanha. 8. Through desire, thirst is conditioned, clinging, tanha pachaya upadaman. 9. Through clinging is conditioned the process of becoming, kudana pakaya bhavo. 10. Through the process of becoming is conditioned birth, bhava pachaya jati. 11.3 Birth are conditioned, 12 decay, death, lamentation, pain, etc. Jatipachaya Jarmarinam. This is how life arises, exists, and continues. If we take this formula in its reverse order, we come to the cessation of the process. Through the complete cessation of ignorance, volitional activities or karma formations cease. Through the cessation of volitional activities, consciousness ceases. Through the cessation of birth, decay, death, sorrow, etc. cease. It should be clearly remembered that each of these factors is conditioned, paticasam upabana, as well as conditioning, papakasam upabada. Therefore, they are all relative, interdependent, and interconnected, and nothing is absolute or independent. Hence, no first cause is accepted by Buddhism, as we have seen earlier. Conditioned genesis should be considered as a circle and not as a chain. The question of free will has occupied an important place in Western thought and philosophy, but according to conditioned genesis, this question does not and cannot arise in Buddhist philosophy. If the whole of existence is relative, conditioned, and interdependent, how can will alone be free? Will, like any other thought, is conditioned. So-called freedom itself is conditioned and relative. Such a conditioned and relative free will is not denied. There can be nothing absolutely free, physical or mental, as everything is interdependent and relative. If free will implies a will independent of conditions, independent of cause and effect, such a thing does not exist. How can a will, or anything for that matter, arise without conditions, away from cause and effect, when the whole of existence is conditioned and relative, and is within the law of cause and effect? Here again, the idea of free will is basically connected with the ideas of God, soul, justice, reward, and punishment. Not only is so-called free will not free, but even the very idea of free will is not free from conditions. According to the doctrine of conditioned genesis, as well as according to the analysis of being into 5 aggregates, the idea of an abiding, immortal substance in man or outside, whether it is called Atman, I, soul, self, or ego, is considered only a false belief, a mental projection. This is Buddhist doctrine of anatta, no soul or no self. In order to avoid a confusion, it should be mentioned here that there are 2 kinds of truths: conventional truth, samutisaka, skut, samvirtisatya, and ultimate truth, paramatasaka, skut, samvirtisatya. When we use such expressions in our daily life as I, you, being, individual, etc., we do not lie because there is no self or being as such, but we speak a truth conforming to the convention of the world. But the ultimate truth is that there is no I or being in reality. As the Mahayana's Pudzagara says, a person should be mentioned as existing only in designation, prajnapit, i.e., conventionally there is a being, but not in reality, or substance dravya. The negation of an imperishable Atman is the common characteristic of all dogmatic systems of the lesser as well as the great vehicle, and there is, therefore, no reason to assume that Buddhist tradition, which is in complete agreement on this point, has deviated from the Buddha's original teaching. It is therefore curious that recently there should have been a vain attempt by a few scholars to smuggle the idea of self into the teaching of the Buddha, quite contrary to the spirit of Buddhism. These scholars respect, admire, and venerate the Buddha and his teaching. They look up to Buddhism, but they cannot imagine that the Buddha, whom they consider the most clear and profound thinker, could have denied the existence of an Atman or self, which they need so much. They unconsciously seek the support of the Buddha for this need for eternal existence. Of course, not in a petty individual self with small s, but in the big self with a capital S. It is better to say frankly that one believes in an Atman, or self, or one may even say that the Buddha was totally wrong in denying the existence of an Atman. But certainly it will not do for anyone to try to introduce into Buddhism an idea which the Buddha never accepted, as far as we can see from the extant original texts. Religions, which believe in God and soul, make no secret of these 2 ideas. On the contrary, they proclaim them constantly and repeatedly in the most eloquent terms. If the Buddha had accepted these 2 ideas, so important in all religions, he certainly would have declared them publicly, as he had spoken about other things, and would not have left them hidden to be discovered only 25 centuries after his death. People become nervous at the idea that through the Buddha's teaching of anatta, the self they imagine they have is going to be destroyed. The Buddha was not unaware of this. A bhikkhu once asked him, "Sir, is there a case where one is tormented when something permanent within oneself is not found?" "Yes, bhikkhu, there is," answered the Buddha. "A man has the following view. The universe is that Atman, I shall be that after death, permanent, abiding, everlasting, unchanging, and I shall exist as for eternity." He hears the Tathagata, or a disciple of his, preaching the doctrine aiming at the complete destruction of all speculative views, aiming at the extinction of thirst, aiming at detachment, cessation, nirvana. Then that man thinks, "I will be annihilated, I will be destroyed, I will be no more." So he mourns, worries himself, laments, weeps, beating his breast, and becomes bewildered. Thus, O bhikkhu, there is a case where one is tormented when something permanent within oneself is not found. Elsewhere, the Buddha says, "O bhikkhus, this idea that I may not be, I may not have, is frightening to the uninstructed worldling." Those who want to find a self in Buddhism argue as follows. It is true that the Buddha analyses being into matter, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, and says that none of these things is self, but he does not say that there is no self at all in man, or anywhere else, apart from these aggregates. This position is untenable for two reasons. One is that, according to the Buddha's teaching, a being is composed only of these five aggregates and nothing more. Nowhere has he said that there was anything more than these five aggregates in a being. The second reason is that the Buddha denied categorically, in unequivocal terms in more than one place, the existence of Atman, soul, self, or ego within man or without, or anywhere else in the universe. Let us take some examples. In the Dhammapada, there are 3 verses extremely important and essential in the Buddha's teaching. They are Nos 0.56 and 7 of chapter 20, or verses 2, 7, 7, 2, 7, 8, 2, 7, 9. The first 2 verses say, "All conditioned things are impermanent, sabya samkhachara." The third verse says, "All dhammas are without self, sabbe dhyama, anatta." Here it should be carefully observed that in the first 2 verses the word sankhara, conditioned things, is used, but in its place in the third verse the word dhamma is used. Why didn't the third verse use the word sankhara, conditioned things, as the previous 2 verses, and why did it use the term dhamma instead? Here lies the crux of the whole matter. The term samkhara denotes the 5 aggregates, all conditioned, interdependent, relative thing and states, both physical and mental. If the third verse said, "All samkhara, conditioned things, are without self," then one might think that, although conditioned things are without self, yet there may be a self outside conditioned things, outside the 5 aggregates. It is in order to avoid misunderstanding that the term dhamma is used in the third verse. The term dhamma is much wider than samkhara. There is no term in Buddhist terminology wider than dhamma. It includes not only the conditioned things and states, but also the non-conditioned, the absolute, nirvana. There is nothing in the universe or outside, good or bad, conditioned or non-conditioned, relative or absolute, which is not included in this term. Therefore, it is quite clear that, according to this statement, all dhammas are without self. There is no self, no Atman, not only in the 5 aggregates, but nowhere else, too, outside them or apart from them. This means, according to the Theravada teaching, that there is no self either in the individual or in dhammas. The Mahayana Buddhist philosophy maintains exactly the same position without the slightest difference on this point, putting emphasis on dharma nairatmya as well as on pudgala nairatmya. In the Eligadupama Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, addressing his disciples, the Buddha said, "O bhikkhus, accept a soul theory, attavada, in the acceptance of which there would not arise grief, lamentation, suffering, distress, and tribulation." But do you see, O bhikkhus, such a soul theory in the acceptance of which there would not arise grief, lamentation, suffering, distress, and tribulation? Certainly not, sir. Good, O bhikkhus. I, too, O bhikkhus, do not see a soul theory in the acceptance of which there would not arise grief, lamentation, suffering, distress, and tribulation. If there had been any soul theory which the Buddha had accepted, he would certainly have explained it here, because he asked the bhikkhus to accept that soul theory which did not produce suffering. But in the Buddha's view, there is no such soul theory. And any soul theory, whatever it may be, however subtle and sublime, is false and imaginary, creating all kind of problems, producing in its train grief, lamentation, suffering, distress, tribulation, and trouble. Continuing the discourse, the Buddha said in the same sutta, "O bhikkhus, when neither self nor anything pertaining to self can truly and really be found, this speculative view, the universe is that Atman, soul. I shall be that after death, permanent, abiding, everlasting, unchanging, and I shall exist as such for eternity. Is it not wholly and completely foolish?" Here the Buddha explicitly states that an Atman, or soul, or self, is nowhere to be found in reality, and it is foolish to believe that there is such a thing. Those who seek a self in the Buddha's teaching quote a few examples which they first translate wrongly and then misinterpret. One of them is the will, known line atano nato from the Dhammapada xei 4, or verse 160, which is translated as self is the lord of self, and then interpreted to mean that the big self is the lord of the small self. First of all, this translation is incorrect. Atta here does not mean self in the sense of soul. In Pali, the word atta is generally used as a reflexive or indefinite pronoun, except in a few cases where it specifically and philosophically refers to the soul, theory, as we have seen above. But in general usage, as in the chapter in the Dhammapada there this line occurs, and in many other places, it is used as a reflexive or indefinite pronoun meaning myself, yourself, himself, one, oneself, etc. Next, the word natho does not mean lord, but refuge, support, help, protection. Therefore, atayatano natho really means one is one's own refuge, or one is one's own help or support. It has nothing to do with any metaphysical soul or self. It simply means that you have to rely on yourself and not on others. Another example of the attempt to introduce the idea of self into the Buddhist teaching is in the well-known words atadipa viharata, atasarana ananasarana, which are taken out of context in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. This phrase literally means, dwell making yourselves your island. Support, making yourselves your refuge and not anyone else as your refuge. Those who wish to see a self in Buddhism interpret the words atadipa and atasarana, taking self as a lamp, taking self as a refuge. We cannot understand the full meaning and significance of the advice of the Buddha to Ananda unless we take into consideration the background and the context in which these words were spoken. The Buddha was at the time staying at a village called Beluva. It was just 3 months before his death, Parinirvana. At this time, he was 80 years old and was suffering from a very serious illness, almost dying, Maranantika. But he thought it was not proper for him to die without breaking it to his disciples who were near and dear to him. So, with courage and determination, he bore all his pains, got the better of his illness, and recovered. But his health was still poor. After his recovery, he was seated one day in the shade outside his residence. Ananda, the most devoted attendant of the Buddha, went to his beloved master, sat near him and said, "Sir, I have looked after the health of the Blessed One. I have looked after him in his illness. But at the sight of the illness of the Blessed One, the horizon became dim to me, and my faculties were no longer clear. Yet there was one little consolation. I thought that the Blessed One would not pass away until he had left instructions touching the order of the Sangha." Then the Buddha, full of compassion and human feeling, gently spoke to his devoted and beloved attendant. "Ananda, what does the order of the Sangha expect from me? I have taught the Dhamma truth, without making any distinction as exoteric and esoteric. With regard to the truth, the Tathagata has nothing like the closed fist of a teacher, Akarya Mutti. Surely, Ananda, if there is anyone who thinks that he will lead the Sangha, and that the Sangha should depend on him, let him set down his instructions. But the Tathagata has no such idea. Why should he then leave instructions concerning the Sangha? I am now old, Ananda, 80 years old, as a worn-out cart has to be kept going by repairs. Therefore, Ananda, dwell making yourselves your island, support, making yourselves, not anyone else, your refuge." making the Dhamma your island, support, the Dhamma your refuge, nothing else your refuge. What the Buddha wanted to convey to Ananda is quite clear. The latter was sad and depressed. He thought that they would all be lonely, helpless, without a refuge, without a leader after their great teacher's death. So the Buddha gave him consolation, courage, and confidence, saying that they should depend on themselves and on the Dhamma he taught and not on anyone else or on anything else. Here, the question of a metaphysical Atman, or self, is quite beside the point. Further, the Buddha explained to Ananda how one could be one's own island or refuge, how one could make the Dhamma one's own island or refuge, through the cultivation of mindfulness or awareness of the body, sensations, mind, and mind objects, the 4 satipatthanas. There is no talk at all here about an Atman or self. Another reference, oft quoted, is used by those who try to find Atman in the Buddhist teaching. The Buddha was once seated under a tree in a forest on the way to Uruvela from Benares. On that day, 30 friends, all of them young princes, went out on a picnic with their young wives into the same forest. One of the princes, who was unmarried, brought a prostitute with him. While the others were amusing themselves, she purloined some objects of value and disappeared. In their search for her in the forest, they saw the Buddha seated under a tree and asked him whether he had seen a woman. He inquired what was the matter. When they explained, the Buddha asked them, "What do you think, young men? Which is better for you, to search after a woman or to search after yourselves?" Here again it is a simple and natural question, and there is no justification for introducing far-fetched ideas of a metaphysical Atman or self into the business. They answered that it was better for them to search after themselves. The Buddha asked them to sit down and explain the Dhamma to them. In the available account in the original text of what he preached to them, not a word is mentioned about an Atman. Much has been written on the subject of the Buddha's silence when a certain Parivrajaka wanderer named Vacchagotta asked him whether there was an Atman or not. The story is as follows. Vacchagotta comes to the Buddha and asks, "Venerable Gautama, is there an Atman?" The Buddha is silent. Vacchagotta gets up and goes away. After the Parivrajaka had left, Ananda asks the Buddha why he did not answer Vacchagotta's question. The Buddha explains his position. "Ananda, when asked by Vacchagotta the wanderer, is there a self? If I had answered, there is a self, then, Ananda, that would be siding with those recluses and brahmanas who hold the eternalist theory, Tathāgatavada. And Ananda, when asked by the wanderer, is there no self? If I had answered, there is no self, then that would be siding with those recluses and brahmanas who hold the annihilationist theory, Uccādavada. Again, Ananda, when asked by Vacchagotta, is there a self? If I had answered, there is a self, would that be in accordance with my knowledge that all Dhammas are without self? Surely not, sir. And again, Ananda, when asked by the wanderer, is there no self? If I had answered, there is no self, then that would have been a greater confusion to the already confused Vacchagotta. For he would have thought, formerly indeed I had an Atman self, but now I haven't got one. It should now be quite clear why the Buddha was silent, but it will be still clearer if we take into consideration the whole background and the way the Buddha treated questions and questioners, which is altogether ignored by those who discuss this problem. The Buddha was not a computing machine giving answers to whatever questions were put to him by anyone at all without any consideration. He was a practical teacher, full of compassion and wisdom. He did not answer questions to show his knowledge and intelligence, but to help the questioner on the way to realization. He always spoke to people bearing in mind their standard of development, their tendencies, their mental makeup, their character, their capacity to understand a particular question. According to the Buddha, there are 4 ways of treating questions. 1. Some should be answered directly. 2. Others should be answered by way of analyzing them. 3. Yet others should be answered by counter-questions. 4. And lastly, there are questions which should be put aside. There may be several ways of putting aside a question. One is to say that a particular question is not answered or explained, as the Buddha had told this very same Vacchagotta on more than one occasion, when those famous questions whether the universe is eternal or not, etc., were put to him. in the same way he had replied to Malunkyaputta and others. But he could not say the same thing with regard to the question whether there is an Atman self or not, because he had always discussed and explained it. He could not say there is self, because it is contrary to his knowledge that all Dhammas are without self. Then he did not want to say there is no self, because that would unnecessarily, without any purpose, have confused and disturbed poor Vakagata, who was already confused on a similar question, as he had himself admitted earlier. He was not yet in a position to understand the idea of anatta. Therefore, to put aside this question by silence was the wisest thing in this particular case. We must not forget, too, that the Buddha had known Vakagata quite well for a long time. This was not the first occasion on which this inquiring wanderer had come to see him. The wise and compassionate teacher gave much thought and showed great consideration for this confused seeker. There are many references in the Pali texts to this same Vakagata the wanderer, his going round quite often to see the Buddha and his disciples and putting the same kind of question again and again, evidently very much worried, almost obsessed by these problems. The Buddha's silence seems to have much more effect on Vakagata than any eloquent answer or discussion. Some people take self to mean what is generally known as mind or consciousness, but the Buddha says that it is better for a man to take his physical body as self rather than mind, thought, or consciousness, because the former seems to be more solid than the later, because mind, thought, or consciousness, chitta, mano, vijnana, changes constantly day and night, even faster than the body, kaya. It is the vague feeling I am that creates the idea of self, which has no corresponding reality, and to see this truth is to realize nirvana, which is not very easy. In the Samyutta Nikaya, there is an enlightening conversation on this point between a bhikkhu named Kemaka and a group of bhikkhus. These bhikkhus ask Kemaka whether he sees in the five aggregates any self or anything pertaining to a self. Kemaka replies, no. Then the bhikkhus say that if so, he should be an arahant free from all impurities. But Kemaka confesses that, though he does not find in the five aggregates a self or anything pertaining to a self, I am not an arahant free from all impurities. Oh friends, with regard to the five aggregates of attachment, I have a feeling I am, but I do not clearly see this is I am. Then Kemaka explains that what he calls I am is neither matter, sensation, perception, mental formations, nor consciousness, nor anything without them. But he has the feeling I am with regard to the five aggregates, though he could not see clearly this is I am. He says it is like the smell of a flower. It is neither the smell of the petals, nor of the color, nor of the pollen, but the smell of the flower. Kemaka further explains that even a person who has attained the early stages of realization still retains this feeling, I am. But later on, when he progresses further, this feeling of I am altogether disappears, just as the chemical smell of a freshly washed cloth disappears after a time when it is kept in a box. This discussion was so useful and enlightening to them that at the end of it, the text says, all of them, including Kemaka himself, became arahants, free from form all impurities, thus finally getting rid of I am. According to the Buddha's teaching, it is as wrong to hold the opinion I have no self, which is the annihilationist theory, as to hold the opinion I have self, which is the eternalist theory, because both are fetters, both arising out of the false idea I am. The correct position with regard to the question of anatta is not to take hold of any opinions or views, but to try to see things objectively as they are without mental projections, to see that what we call I or being is only a combination of physical and mental aggregates, which are working together interdependently in flux of momentary change within the law of cause and effect, and that there is nothing permanent, everlasting, unchanging, and eternal in the whole of existence. Here naturally a question arises: if there is no Atman or self, who gets the results of karma, actions? No one can answer this question better than the Buddha himself. When this question was raised by a bhikkhu, the Buddha said, I have taught you, O bhikkhus, to see conditionality everywhere in all things. The Buddha's teaching on anatta, no soul or no shelf, should not be considered as negative or nihilistic. Like nirvana, it is truth, reality, and reality cannot be negative. It is the false belief in a non-existing imaginary self that is negative. The teaching on anatta dispels the darkness of false beliefs and produces the light of wisdom. It is not negative, as Iyengar very aptly says. There is the fact of no selfness, as Nirotami Stita. Chapter 0.7, Meditation of Mental Culture, Bhavana. The Buddha said, "O bhikkhus, there are two kinds of illness. What are those two? Physical illness and mental illness. There seem to be people who enjoy freedom from physical illness even for a year or two, even for 100 years or more. But, O bhikkhus, rare in this world are those who enjoy freedom from mental illness even for one moment, except those who are free from mental defilements, i.e., except arahants." The Buddha's teaching, particularly his way of meditation, aims at producing a state of perfect mental health, equilibrium, and tranquility. It is unfortunate that hardly any other section of the Buddha's teaching is so much misunderstood as meditation, both by Buddhists and non-Buddhists. The moment the word meditation is mentioned, one thinks of an escape from the daily activities of life, assuming a particular posture, like a statue in some cave or cell in a monastery, in some remote place cut off from society, and musing on or being absorbed in some kind of mystic or mysterious thought or trance. True Buddhist meditation deteriorated and degenerated into a kind of ritual or ceremony, almost technical in its routine. Most people are interested in meditation or yoga in order to gain some spiritual or mystic powers, like the third eye, which others do not possess. There was some time ago a Buddhist nun in India who was trying to develop a power to see through her ears, while she was still in the possession of the power of perfect eyesight. This kind of idea is nothing but spiritual perversion. It is always a question of desire, thirst for power. The word meditation is a very poor substitute for the original term bhavarana, which means culture or development, i.e., mental culture or mental development. The Buddhist bhavarana, properly speaking, is mental culture in the full sense of the term. It aims at cleansing the mind of impurities and disturbances, such as lustful desires, hatred, ill will, indolence, worries and restlessness, skeptical doubts, and cultivating such qualities as concentration, awareness, intelligence, will, energy, the analytical faculty, confidence, joy, tranquility, leading finally to the attainment of highest wisdom, which sees the nature of things as they are and realizes the ultimate truth, nirvana. There are two forms of meditation. One is the development of mental concentration, samatha or samadhi, of one-pointedness of mind, sitakagata, skita-kagata, by various methods prescribed in the texts, leading up to the highest mystic states such as the sphere of nothingness or the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. All these mystic states, according to the Buddha, are mind-created, mind-produced, conditioned samkhata. They have nothing to do with reality, truth, nirvana. This form of meditation existed before the Buddha. Hence, it is not purely Buddhist, but it is not excluded from the field of Buddhist meditation. However, it is not essential for the realization of nirvana. The Buddha himself, before his enlightenment, studied these yogic practices under different teachers and attained to the highest mystic states. But he was not satisfied with them because they did not give complete liberation. They did not give insight into the ultimate reality. He considered these mystic states only as happy living in this existence, or peaceful living, and nothing more. He therefore discovered the other form of meditation known as vipassana, insight into the nature of things, leading to the complete liberation of mind, to the realization of the ultimate truth, nirvana. This is essentially Buddhist meditation, Buddhist mental culture. It is an analytical method based on mindfulness, awareness, vigilance, observation. It is impossible to do justice to such a vast subject in a few pages. However, an attempt is made here to give a very brief and rough idea of the true Buddhist meditation, mental culture or mental development, in a practical way. The most important discourse ever given by the Buddha on mental development, meditation, is called the Satipatthana Suttas, the setting up of mindfulness. No. 22 of the Digha Nikaya, or No. 1 of the Majjhima Nikaya. This discourse is so highly venerated in tradition that it is regularly recited not only in Buddhist monasteries, but also in Buddhist homes with members of the family sitting round and listening with deep devotion. Very often bhikkhus recite this sutta by the bedside of a dying man to purify his last thoughts. The ways of meditation given in this discourse are not cut off from life, nor do they avoid life. On the contrary, they are all connected with our life, our daily activities, our sorrows and joys, our words and thoughts, our moral and intellectual occupations. The discourse is divided into 4 main sections. The first section deals with our body, kaya, the second with our feelings and sensations, vedana, the third with the mind, citta, and the fourth with various moral and intellectual subjects, dhamma. It should be clearly borne in mind that whatever the form of meditation may be, the essential thing is mindfulness or awareness, sati, attention or observation, anupassana. One of the most well-known, popular, and practical examples of meditation connected with the body is called the mindfulness or awareness of in and out breathing, anapanasati. It is for this meditation only that a particular and definite posture is prescribed in the text. For other forms of meditation given in this sutta, you may sit, stand, walk, or lie down as you like. But for cultivating mindfulness of in and out of breathing, one should sit, according to the text, cross-legged, keeping the body erect and the mindfulness alert. But sitting cross-legged is not practical and easy for people of all countries, particularly for Westerners. Therefore, those who find it difficult to sit cross-legged may sit on a chair, keeping the body erect and mindfulness alert. It is very necessary for this exercise that the meditator should sit erect but not stiff, his hands placed comfortably on his lap. Thus seated, you may close your eyes, or you may gaze at the tip of your nose, as it may be convenient to you. You breathe in and out all day and night, but you are never mindful of it. You never for a second concentrate your mind on it. Now you are going to do just this. Breathe in and out as usual, without any effort or strain. Now bring your mind to concentrate on your breathing in and out. Let your mind watch and observe your breathing in and out. Let your mind be aware and vigilant of your breathing in and out. When you breathe, you sometimes take deep breaths, sometimes not. This does not matter at all. Breathe normally and naturally. The only thing is that when you take deep breaths, you should be aware that they are deep breaths, and so on. In other words, your mind should be so fully concentrated on your breathing that you are aware of its movements and changes. Forget all other things. Your surroundings, your environment. Do not raise your eyes and look at anything. Try to do this for 5 or 10 minutes. At the beginning, you will find it extremely difficult to bring your mind to concentrate on your breathing. You will be astonished how your mind runs away. It does not stay. You begin to think of various things. You hear sounds outside. Your mind is disturbed and distracted. You may be dismayed and disappointed. But if you continue to practice this exercise twice daily, morning and evening, for about 5 or 10 minutes at a time, you will gradually, by and by, begin to concentrate your mind on your breathing. After a certain period, you will experience just that split second when your mind is fully concentrated on your breathing, when you will not hear even sounds nearby, when no external world exists for you. This slight moment is such a tremendous experience for you, full of joy, happiness, and tranquility, that you would like to continue it, but still you cannot. Yet, if you go on practicing this regularly, you may repeat the experience again and again for longer and longer periods. That is the moment when you lose yourself completely in your mindfulness of breathing. As long as you are conscious of yourself, you can never concentrate on anything. This exercise of mindfulness of breathing, which is one of the simplest and easiest practices, is meant to develop concentration leading up to very high mystic attainments, dhyana. Besides, the power of concentration is essential for any kind of deep understanding, penetration, insight into the nature of things, including the realization of nirvana. Apart from all this, this exercise on breathing gives you immediate results. It is good for your physical health, for relaxation, sound sleep, and for efficiency in your daily work. It makes you calm and tranquil. Even at moments when you are nervous or excited, if you practice this for a couple of minutes, you will see for yourself that you become immediately quiet and at peace. You feel as if you have awakened after a good rest. Another very important, practical, and useful form of meditation, mental development, is to be aware and mindful of whatever you do, physically or verbally, during the daily routine of work in your life, private, public, or professional. Whether you walk, stand, sit, lie down, or sleep, whether you stretch or bend your limbs, whether you look around, whether you put on your clothes, whether you talk or keep silence, whether you eat or drink, even whether you answer the calls of nature, in these and other activities you answer the calls of nature. In these and other activities you should be fully aware and mindful of the act you perform at the moment. That is to say, that you should live in the present moment, in the present action. This does not mean that you should not think of the past or the future at all. On the contrary, you think of them in relation to the present moment, the present action, when and where it is relevant. People do not generally live in their actions, in the present moment. They live in the past or in the future. Though they seem to be doing something now, here, they live somewhere else in their thoughts, in their imaginary problems and worries, usually in the memories of the past or in desires and speculations about the future. Therefore, they do not live in, nor do they enjoy what they do at the moment. So they are unhappy and discontented with the present moment, with the work at hand, and naturally they cannot give themselves fully to what they appear to be doing. Sometimes you see a man in a restaurant reading while eating, a very common sight. He gives you the impression of being a very busy man with no time even for eating. You wonder whether he eats or reads. One may say that he does both. In fact, he does neither. He enjoys neither. He is strained and disturbed in mind, and he does not enjoy what he does at the moment, does not live his life in the present moment, but unconsciously and foolishly tries to escape from life. This does not mean, however, that one should not talk with a friend while having lunch or dinner. You cannot escape life however you may try. As long as you live, whether in a town or in a cave, you have to face it and live it. Real life is the present moment, not the memories of the past which is dead and gone, nor the dreams of the future which is not yet born. One who lives in the present moment lives the real life, and he is happiest. When asked why his disciples, who lived a simple and quiet life with only one meal a day, were so radiant, the Buddha replied, "They do not repent the past, nor do they brood over the future. They live in the present. Therefore they are radiant. By brooding over the future and repenting the past, fools dry up like green reeds cut down in the sun." Mindfulness or awareness does not mean that you should think and be conscious, "I am doing this" or "I am doing that." No, just the contrary. The moment you think, "I am doing this," you become self-conscious, and then you do not live in the action, but you live in the idea "I am," and consequently your work too is spoilt. You should forget yourself completely and lose yourself in what you do. The moment a speaker becomes self-conscious and thinks, "I am addressing an audience," his speech is disturbed and his trend of thought broken. But when he forgets himself in his speech, in his subject, then he is at his best. He speaks well and explains things clearly. All great work, artistic, poetic, intellectual, or spiritual, is produced at those moments when its creators are lost completely in their actions, when they forget themselves altogether and are free from self-consciousness. This mindfulness or awareness with regard to our activities, taught by the Buddha, is to live in the present moment, to live in the present action. This is also the Zen way, which is based primarily on this teaching. Here in this form of meditation, you haven't got to perform any particular action in order to develop mindfulness, but you have only to be mindful and aware of whatever you may do. You haven't got to spend 1 second of your precious time on this particular meditation. You have only to cultivate mindfulness and awareness always, day and night, with regard to all activities in your usual daily life. These two forms of meditation discussed above are connected with our body. Then there is a way of practicing mental development, meditation with regard to all our sensations or feelings, whether happy, unhappy, or neutral. Let us take only one example. You experience an unhappy, sorrowful sensation. In this state, your mind is cloudy, hazy, not clear. It is depressed. In some cases, you do not even see clearly why you have that unhappy feeling. First of all, you should learn not to be unhappy about your unhappy feeling, not to be worried about your worries, but try to see clearly why there is a sensation or a feeling of unhappiness or worry or sorrow. Try to examine how it arises, its cause, how it disappears, its cessation. Try to examine it as if you are observing it from outside, without any subjective reaction, as a scientist observes some object. Here, too, you should not look at it as my feeling or my sensation subjectively, but only look at it as a feeling or a sensation objectively. You should forget again the false idea of I. When you see its nature, how it arises and disappears, your mind grows dispassionate towards that sensation and becomes detached and free. It is the same with regard to all sensations or feelings. Now let us discuss the form of meditation with regard to our minds. You should be fully aware of the fact whenever your mind is passionate or detached, whenever it is overpowered by hatred, ill will, jealousy, or is full of love, compassion, whenever it is deluded or has a clear and right understanding, and so on and so forth. We must admit that very often we are afraid or ashamed to look at our own minds, so we prefer to avoid it. One should be bold and sincere, and look at one's own mind as one looks at one's face in a mirror. Here is no attitude of criticizing or judging, or discriminating between right and wrong or good and bad. It is simply observing, watching, examining. You are not a judge, but a scientist. When you observe your mind and see its true nature clearly, you become dispassionate with regard to its emotions, sentiments, and states. Thus, you become detached and free so that you may see things as they are. Let us take one example. Say you are really angry, overpowered by anger, ill will, hatred. It is curious and paradoxical that the man who is in anger is not really aware, not mindful that he is angry. The moment he becomes aware and mindful of that state of his mind, the moment he sees his anger, it becomes as if it were shy and ashamed and begins to subside. You should examine its nature, how it arises, how it disappears. Here again, it should be remembered that you should not think, I am angry, or of my anger. You should only be aware and mindful of the state of an angry mind. You are only observing and examining an angry mind objectively. This should be the attitude with regard to all sentiments, emotions, and states of mind. Then, there is a form of meditation on ethical, spiritual, and intellectual subjects. All our studies, reading, discussions, conversation, and deliberations on such subjects are included in this meditation. To read this book and to think deeply about the subjects discussed in it is a form of meditation. We have seen earlier that the conversation between Kamaka and the group of monks was a form of meditation which led to the realization of nirvana. So according to this form of meditation, you may study, think, and deliberate on the 5 hindrances, ninarana, namely, 1. Lustful desires, kamakachanda, 2. Ill will, hatred or anger, vyapada, 3. Torpor and languor, thinamita, 4. Restlessness and worry, udakaku koku, and 5. Optus pribokako, 5. Skeptical doubts, visikiccha. These 5 are considered as hindrances to any kind of clear understanding, as a matter of fact to any kind of progress. When one is overpowered by them, and when one does not know how to get rid of them, then one cannot understand right and wrong or good and bad. One may also meditate on the 7 factors of enlightenment. Bojjhanga, they are 1. Mindfulness satitai, i.e. to be aware and mindful in all activities and movements both physical and mental, as we discussed above. 2. Investigation and research into the various problem of doctrine, Dhamma Vichaya. Included here are all our religious, ethical, and philosophical studies, reading, researches, discussions, conversation, even attending lectures relating to such doctrinal subjects. 3. Energy, virya, to work with determination till the end. 4. Joy, piti, the quality quite contrary to the pessimistic, gloomy, or melancholic attitude of mind. 5. Relaxation, passivity, of both body and mind. One should not be stiff physically or mentally. 6. Concentration, samadhi, as discussed above. 7. Equanimity, upekkha, i.e., to be able to face life in all its vicissitudes with calm of mind, tranquility, without disturbance. To cultivate these qualities, the most essential thing is a genuine wish, will, or inclination. Many other material and spiritual conditions conducive to the development of each quality are described in the texts. One may also meditate on such subjects as the 5 aggregates investigating the question, what is a being? Or what is it that is called I? Or on the 4 Noble Truths, as we discussed above. Study and investigation of those subjects constitute this 4th form of meditation, which leads to the realization of ultimate truth. Apart from those we have discussed here, there are many other subjects of meditation, traditionally 40 in number, among which mention should be made particularly of the 4 sublime states. Brahma Vihahar. 1. Extending unlimited, universal love and goodwill, metta, to all living beings without any kind of discrimination, just as a mother loves her only child. 2. Compassion, karuna, for all living beings who are suffering in trouble and affliction. 3. Sympathetic joy in others' success, welfare, and happiness, and equanimity in all vicissitudes of life. Instruction for life. 1. Take into account that great love and great achievements involve great risk. 2. When you lose, don't lose the lesson. 3. Follow the 3 R's: respect for self, respect for others, and responsibility for all your actions. 4. Remember that not getting what you want is sometimes a wonderful stroke of luck. 5. Learn the rules so you know how to break them properly. 6. Don't let a little dispute injure a great friendship. 7. When you realize you've made a mistake, take immediate steps to correct it. 8. Spend some time alone every day. 9. Open your arms to change, but don't let go of your values. 10. Remember that silence is sometimes the best answer. 11. Live a good, honorable life. Then, when you get older and think back, you'll be able to enjoy it a second time. 12. A loving atmosphere in your home is the foundation for your life. 13. In disagreements with loved ones, deal only with the current situation. Don't bring up the past. 14. Share your knowledge. It's a way to achieve immortality. 15. Be gentle with the earth. 16. Once a year, go someplace you've never been before. 17. Remember that the best relationship is one in which your love for each other exceeds your need for each other. 18. Judge your success by what you had to give up in order to get it. 19. Approach love and cooking with reckless abandon. There are some who believe that Buddhism is so lofty and sublime a system that it cannot be practiced by ordinary men and women in this workaday world of ours, and that one has to retire from it to a monastery or to some quiet place if one desires to be a true Buddhist. This is a sad misconception, due evidently to a lack of understanding of the teaching of the Buddha. People run to such hasty and wrong conclusions as a result of their hearing or reading casually something about Buddhism written by someone who, as he has not understood the subject in all its aspects, gives only a partial and lopsided view of it. The Buddhist teaching is meant not only for monks in monasteries, but also for ordinary men and women living at home with their families. The Noble Eightfold Path, which is the Buddhist way of life, is meant for all, without distinction of any kind. The vast majority of people in the world cannot turn monk or retire into caves or forests. However noble and pure Buddhism may be, it would be useless to the masses of mankind if they could not follow it in their daily life in the world of today. But if you understand the spirit of Buddhism correctly, and not only its letter, you can surely follow and practice it while living the life of an ordinary man. There may be some who find it easier and more convenient to accept Buddhism if they do live in a remote place, cut off from the society of others. Others may find that that kind of retirement dulls and depresses their whole being both physically and mentally, and that it may not therefore be conducive to the development of their spiritual and intellectual life. True renunciation does not mean running away physically from the world. Sariputta, the chief disciple of the Buddha, said that one man might live in a forest, devoting himself to ascetic practices, but might be full of impure thoughts and defilements. Another might live in a village or a town, practicing no ascetic discipline, but his mind might be pure and free from defilements. Of these two, said Sariputta, the one who lives a pure life in the village or town is definitely far superior to and greater than the one who lives in the forest. The common belief that to follow the Buddha's teaching one has to retire from life is a misconception. It is really an unconscious defense against practicing it. There are numerous references in Buddhist literature to men and women living ordinary, normal family lives who successfully practiced what the Buddha taught and realized nirvana. Vakagata the wanderer, whom we met earlier in the chapter on anatta, once asked the Buddha straightforwardly whether there were laymen and women leading the family life, who followed his teaching successfully and attained to high spiritual states. The Buddha categorically stated that there were not one or two, not 100 or 200 or 500, but many more laymen and women leading the family life, who followed his teaching successfully and attained to high spiritual states. It may be agreeable for certain people to live a retired life in a quiet place away from noise and disturbance, but it is certainly more praiseworthy and courageous to practice Buddhism living among your fellow beings, helping them, and being of service to them. It may perhaps be useful in some cases for a man to live in retirement for a time in order to improve his mind and character, as preliminary moral, spiritual, and intellectual training to be strong enough to come out later and help others. But if a man lives all his life in solitude, thinking only of his own happiness and salvation, without caring for his fellows, this surely is not in keeping with the Buddha's teaching, which is based on love, compassion, and service to others. One might now ask, if a man can follow Buddhism while living the life of an ordinary layman, why was the Sangha, the order of monks established by the Buddha? The order provides opportunity for those who are willing to devote their lives not only to their own spiritual and intellectual development, but also to the service of others. An ordinary layman with a family cannot be expected to devote his whole life to the service of others, whereas a monk, who has no family responsibilities or any other worldly ties, is in a position to devote his whole life for the good of the many, for the happiness of the many, according to the Buddha's advice. That is how, in the course of history, the Buddhist monastery became not only a spiritual center, but also a center of learning and culture. The Sigala Sutta, No. 0.00.31 of the Digha Nikaya, shows with what great respect the layman's life, his family, and social relations are regarded by the Buddha. A young man named Sigala used to worship the 6 cardinal points of the heavens, east, south, west, north, nadir, and zenith. In obeying and observing the last advice given him by his dying father, the Buddha told the young man that in the noble discipline, Ariyasa Vinaya, of his teaching, the 6 directions were different. According to his noble discipline, the 6 directions were east, parents; south, teachers; west, wife and children; north, friends, relatives, and neighbors; nadir, servants, workers, and employees; zenith, religious men. One should worship these 6 directions, said the Buddha. Here the word worship, namasya, is very significant, for one worships something sacred, something worthy of honor and respect. These 6 family and social groups mentioned above are treated in Buddhism as sacred, worthy of respect and worship. But how is one to worship them? The Buddha says that one could worship them only by performing one's duties towards them. These duties are explained in his discourse to Sigala. First, parents are sacred to their children. The Buddha says, parents are called Brahma, Brahmati Mata Pataro. The term Brahma denotes the highest and most sacred conception in Indian thought, and in it the Buddha includes parents. So, in good Buddhist families at the present time, children literally worship their parents every day, morning and evening. They have to perform certain duties towards their parents according to the noble discipline. They should look after their parents in their old age, should do whatever they have to do on their behalf, should maintain the honor of the family and continue the family tradition, should protect the wealth earned by their parents, and perform their funeral rites after their death. Parents, in their turn, have certain responsibilities towards their children. They should keep their children away from evil courses, should engage them in good and profitable activities, should give them a good education, should marry them into good families, and should hand over the property to them in due course. Second, The relation between teacher and pupil. A pupil should respect and be obedient to his teacher, should attend to his needs if any, should study earnestly, and the teacher in his turn should train and shape his pupil properly, should teach him well, should introduce him to his friends, and should try to procure him security or employment when his education is over. Third, the relation between husband and wife. Love between husband and wife is considered almost religious or sacred. It is called sarara brahmakarya, sacred family life. Here too, the significance of the term Brahma should be noted. The highest respect is given to this relationship. Wives and husbands should be faithful, respectful, and devoted to each other, and they have certain duties towards each other. The husband should always honor his wife and never be wanting in respect to her. He should love her and be faithful to her, should secure her position and comfort, and should please her by presenting her with clothing and jewelry. The fact that the Buddha did not forget to mention even such a thing as the gifts a husband should make to his wife shows how understanding and sympathetic were his humane feelings towards ordinary human emotions. The wife, in her turn, should supervise and look after household affairs, should entertain guests, visitors, friends, relatives, and employees, should love and be faithful to her husband, should protect his earnings, should be clever and energetic in all activities. Fourth, the relation between friends, relatives, and neighbors. They should be hospitable and charitable to one another, should speak pleasantly and agreeably, should work for each other's welfare, should be on equal terms with one another, should not quarrel among themselves, should help each other in need, and should not forsake each other in difficulty. Fifth, the relation between master and servant. The master or the employer has several obligations towards his servant or his employee. Work should be assigned according to ability and capacity. Adequate wages should be paid. Medical needs should be provided. Occasional donations or bonuses should be granted. The servant or employee in his turn should be diligent and not lazy, honest and obedient, and not cheat his master. He should be earnest in his work.
Sixth, the relation between the religious, lit recluse, and brahmanas and the laity. Lay people should look after the material needs of the religious with love and respect. The religious with a loving heart should impart knowledge and learning to the laity and lead them along the good path away from evil.
We see then that the lay life, with its family and social relations, is included in the noble discipline and is within the framework of the Buddhist way of life, as the Buddha envisaged it. So in the Samyutta Nikaya, one of the oldest Pali texts, Sakka, the king of the gods, Devas, declares that he worships not only the monks who live a virtuous holy life, but also lay disciples, Upasaka, who perform meritorious deeds, who are virtuous, and maintain their families righteously. If one desires to become a Buddhist, there is no initiation ceremony or baptism which one has to undergo. But to become a bhikkhu, a member of the order of the Sangha, one has to undergo a long process of disciplinary training and education. If one understands the Buddha's teaching, and if one is convinced that his teaching is the right path, and if one tries to follow it, then one is a Buddhist. But according to the unbroken age-old tradition in Buddhist countries, one is considered a Buddhist if one takes the Buddha, the Dhamma, the teaching, and the Sangha order of monks, generally called the Triple Gemma, as one's refuges, and undertakes to observe the 5 precepts, Panca Sila, the minimum moral obligations of a lay Buddhist, not to destroy life, 2, not to steal lies, 3, not to tell lies, 5, not to take intoxicating drinks, reciting the formulas given in the ancient texts. On religious occasions, Buddhists in congregation usually recite these formulas, following the lead of a Buddhist monk. There are no external rites or ceremonies which a Buddhist has to perform. Buddhism is a way of life, and what is essential is following the Noble Eightfold Path. Of course, there are in all Buddhist countries simple and beautiful ceremonies on religious occasions. There are shrines with statues of the Buddha, stupas or dagabas, and bo trees in monasteries where Buddhists worship, offer flowers, light lamps, and burn incense. This should not be likened to prayer in theistic religions. It is only a way of paying homage to the memory of the master who showed the way. These traditional observances, though inessential, have their value in satisfying the religious emotions and needs of those who are less advanced intellectually and spiritually, and helping them gradually along the path. Those who think that Buddhism is interested only on lofty ideals, high moral and philosophical thought, and that it ignores the social and economic welfare of people are wrong. The Buddha was interested in the happiness of men. To him, happiness was not possible without leading a pure life based on moral and spiritual principles. But he knew that leading such a life was hard in unfavorable material and social conditions. Buddhism does not consider material welfare as an end in itself. It is only a means to an end, a higher and nobler end. But it is a means which is indispensable in achieving a higher purpose for man's happiness. So, Buddhism recognizes the need of certain minimum material condition favorable to spiritual success, even that of a monk engaged in meditation in some solitary place. The Buddha did not take life out of the context of its social and economic background. He looked at it as a whole in all its social, economic, and political aspects. His teachings on ethical, spiritual, and philosophical problems are fairly well known, but little is known, particularly in the West, about his teaching on social, economic, and political matters. Yet, there are numerous discourses dealing with these scattered throughout the ancient Buddhist texts. Let us take only a few examples. The Kakavātisi Hanada Suttas of the Digha Nikaya, Note 26, clearly states that poverty, daladya, is the cause of immorality and crimes such as theft, falsehood, violence, hatred, cruelty, etc. Kings in ancient times, like government today, tried to suppress the cause of immorality and crimes through punishment. The Kuddadanta Sutta of the same Nikaya explains how futile this is. It says that this method can never be successful. Instead, the Buddha suggests that, in order to eradicate crime, the economic condition of the people should be improved. Grain and other facilities for agriculture should be provided for farmers and cultivators. Capital should be provided for traders and those engaged in business. Adequate wages should be paid to those who are employed. When people are thus provided for with opportunities for earning a sufficient income, they will be contented, will have no fear or anxiety, and consequently, the country will be peaceful and free from crime. Because of this, the Buddha told lay people how important it is to improve their economic condition. This does not mean that he approved of hoarding wealth with desire and attachment, which is against his fundamental teaching, nor did he approve of each and every way of earning one's livelihood. There are certain trades, like the production and sale of armaments, which he condemns as evil means of livelihood, as we saw earlier. A man named Daigajanu once visited the Buddha and said, "Venerable Sir, we are ordinary lay men, leading the family life with wife and children. Would the Blessed One teach us some doctrines which will be conducive to our happiness in this world and hereafter?" The Buddha tells him that there are 4 things which are conducive to a man's happiness in this world. First, he should be skilled, efficient, earnest, and energetic in whatever profession he is engaged, and he should know it well. Ut hanasampada. These refers to protecting wealth from thieves. All these ideas should be considered against the background of the period. Third, he should have good friends, kalyana mita, who are faithful, learned, virtuous, liberal, and intelligent, who will help him along the right path away from evil. Fourth, he should spend reasonably in proportion to his income, neither too much nor too little, i.e., should not hoard wealth avariciously, nor should he be extravagant. In other words, he should live within his means, samajivakata. Then the Buddha expounds the 4 virtues conducive to a layman's happiness hereafter. 1. Sajja. He should have faith and confidence in moral, spiritual, and intellectual values. 2. Sila. He should abstain from destroying and harming life, from stealing and cheating, from adultery, from falsehood, and from intoxicating drinks. 3. Kaja. He should practice charity, generosity, without attachment and craving for his wealth. 4. He should develop wisdom which leads to the complete destruction of suffering, to the realization of nirvana. Sometimes the Buddha even went into details about saving money and spending it, as for instance, when he told the young man, Sagala, that he should spend 1/4 of his income on his daily expenses, invest half in his business, and put aside 1/4 for any emergency. Once the Buddha told Anathapindika, the great banker, one of his most devoted lay disciples who founded for him the celebrated Jetavana monastery at Savatthi, that a layman who leads an ordinary family life has 4 kinds of happiness. The first happiness is to enjoy economic security or sufficient wealth acquired by just and righteous means, ataisukha. The second is spending that wealth liberally on himself, his family, his friends and relatives, and on meritorious deeds, bogasukha. The third, to be free from debts, ananasukha. The fourth happiness is to live a faultless and a pure life without committing evil in thought, word, or deed, ananasukha. It must be noted here that 3 of these kinds are economic, and that the Buddha finally reminded the banker that economic and material happiness is not worth 1/16th part of the spiritual happiness arising out of a faultless and good life. From the few examples given above, one could see that the Buddha considered economic welfare as requisite for human happiness, but that he did not recognize progress as real and true if it was only material, devoid of a spiritual and moral foundation. While encouraging material progress, Buddhism always lays great stress on the development of the moral and spiritual character for a happy, peaceful, and contented society. The Buddha was just as clear on politics, on war and peace. It is too well known to be repeated here that Buddhism advocates and preaches nonviolence and peace as its universal message, and does not approve of any kind of violence or destruction of life. According to Buddhism, there is nothing that can be called a just war, which is only a false term coined and put into circulation to justify and excuse hatred, cruelty, violence, and massacre. Who decides what is just or unjust? The mighty and the victorious are just, and the weak and the defeated are unjust. Our war is always just, and your war is always unjust. Buddhism does not accept this position. The Buddha not only taught nonviolence and peace, but he even went to the field of battle itself and intervened personally and prevented war, as in the case of the dispute between the Sakyas and the Koliyas, who were prepared to fight over the question of the waters of the Rohini. And his words once prevented King Ajatasattu from attacking the kingdom of the Vajis. In the days of the Buddha, as today, there were rulers who governed their countries unjustly. People were oppressed and exploited, tortured and persecuted. Excessive taxes were imposed and cruel punishments were inflicted. The Buddha was deeply moved by these inhumanities. The Dhammapada Takatha records that he therefore directed his attention to the problem of good government. His views should be appreciated against the social, economic, and political background of his time. He had shown how a whole country could become corrupt, degenerate, and unhappy when the heads of its government, that is, the king, the ministers, and administrative officers, become corrupt and unjust. For a country to be happy, it must have a just government. How this form of just government could be realized is explained by the Buddha in his teaching of the 10 duties of the king, Dasaraha Kama, as given in the Jataka text. Of course, the term king, Raja, of old, should be replaced today by the term government. The 10 duties of the king therefore apply today to all those who constitute the government, such as the head of the state, ministers, political leaders, legislative and administrative officers, etc. The first of the 10 duties of the king is liberality, generosity, charity, dana. The ruler should not have craving and attachment to wealth and property, but should give it away for the welfare of the people. Second, a high moral character, sila. He should never destroy life, cheat, steal, and exploit others, commit adultery, utter falsehood, and take intoxicating drinks. That is, he must at least observe the 5 precepts of the layman. Third, sacrificing everything for the good of the people, parikaga, he must be prepared to give up all personal comfort, main and fame, and even his life in the interest of the people. Fourth, honesty and integrity, ajava. He must be free from fear or favor in the discharge of his duties, must be sincere in his intentions, and must not deceive the public.
Fifth, kindness and gentleness, madhava.
He must possess a genial temperament. Sixth, austerity in habits, tapa. He must lead a simple life and should not indulge in a life of luxury. He must have self-control. Seventh, freedom from hatred, ill will, enmity, akoda. He should bear no grudge against anybody. Eighth, non-violence, avihimsa, which means not only that he should harm nobody, but also that he should try to promote peace by avoiding and preventing war, and everything which involves violence and destruction of life. Ninth, patience, forbearance, tolerance, understanding, khanti. He must be able to bear hardships, difficulties, and insults without losing his temper. 10th, non-opposition, non-obstruction. Avidraha. That is to say that he should not oppose the will of the people, should not obstruct any measures that are conducive to the welfare of the people. In other words, he should rule in harmony with his people. If a country is ruled by men endowed with such qualities, it is needless to say that that country must be happy. But this was not a utopia, for there were kings in the past, like Asoka of India, who had established kingdoms based on these ideas. The world today lives in constant fear, suspicion, and tension. Science has produced weapons which are capable of unimaginable destruction. Brandishing these new instruments of death, great powers threaten and challenge one another, boasting shamelessly that one could cause more destruction and misery in the world than the other. They have gone along this path of madness to such a point that, now, if they take one more step forward in that direction, the result will be nothing but mutual annihilation, along with the total destruction of humanity. Human beings, in fear of the situation they have themselves created, want to find a way out and seek some kind of solution. But there is none except that held out by the Buddha, his message of nonviolence and peace, of love and compassion, of tolerance and understanding, of truth and wisdom, of respect and regard for all life, of freedom from selfishness, hatred, and violence. He, Buddha says, never by hatred is hatred appeased, but it is appeased by kindness. This is an eternal truth. One should win anger through kindness, wickedness through goodness, selfishness through charity, and falsehood through truthfulness. There can be no peace or happiness for man as long as he desires and thirsts after conquering and subjugating his neighbor. As the Buddha says, the victor breeds hatred, and the defeated lies down in misery. He who renounces both victory and defeat is happy and peaceful. The only conquest that brings peace and happiness is self-conquest. One may conquer millions in battle, but he who conquers himself, only one, is the greatest of conquerors. You will say this is all very beautiful, noble, and sublime, but impractical. Is it practical to hate one another, to kill one another, to live in eternal fear and suspicion like wild animals in a jungle? Is this more practical and comfortable? Was hatred ever appeased by hatred? Was evil ever won over by evil? But there are examples, at least in individual cases, where hatred is appeased by love and kindness, and evil won over by goodness. You will say that this may be true, practicable in individual cases, but that it never works in national and international affairs. People are hypnotized, psychologically puzzled, blinded, and deceived by the political and propaganda usage of such terms as national, international, or state. What is a nation but a vast conglomeration of individuals? A nation or a state does not act. It is the individual who acts. What the individual thinks and does is what the nation of the state thinks and does. What is applicable to the individual inapplicable to the nation or the state. If hatred can be appeased by love and kindness on the individual scale, surely it can be realized on the national and international scale too. Even in the case of a single person, to meet hatred with kindness one must have tremendous courage, boldness, faith, and confidence in moral force. May it not be even more so with regard to international affairs. If by the expression not practical you mean not easy, you are right. Definitely it is not easy, yet it should be tried. You may say it is risky trying it. Surely it cannot be more risky than trying a nuclear war. It is consolation and inspiration to think today that at least there was one great ruler, well known in history, who had the courage, the confidence, and the vision to apply this teaching of nonviolence, peace, and love to the administration of a vast empire in both internal and external affairs. Asoka, the great Buddhist emperor of India, 3rd century BC, the beloved of the gods as he was called. At first he followed the example of his father, Bindusara, and grandfather, Chandragupta, and wished to complete the conquest of the Indian peninsula. He invaded and conquered Kalinga and annexed it. Many hundreds of thousands were killed, wounded, tortured, and taken prisoner in this war. But later, when he became a Buddhist, he was completely changed and transformed by the Buddhist teaching in one of his famous edicts inscribed on rock edict _ as it is now called, the original of which one may read even today, referring to the conquest of Kalinga. The emperor publicly expressed his repentance and said how extremely painful it was for him to think of that carnage. He publicly declared that he would never draw his sword again for any conquest, but that he wishes all living beings non-violence, self-considered the chief conquest by the beloved of the gods, i.e. Asoka, namely the conquest by piety. Not only did he renounce war himself, he expressed his desire that my sons and grandsons will not think of a new conquest as worth achieving. Let them think of that conquest only which is the conquest by piety, that is good for this world and the world beyond. This is the only example in the history of mankind of a victorious conqueror at the zenith of his power, still possessing the strength to continue his territorial conquests, yet renouncing war and violence and turning to peace and non-violence. Here is a lesson for the world today. The ruler of an empire publicly turned his back on war and violence and embraced the message of peace and non-violence. There is no historical evidence to show that any neighboring king took advantage of Asoka's piety to attack him militarily, or that there was any revolt or rebellion within his empire during his lifetime. On the contrary, there was peace throughout the land, and even countries outside his empire seemed to have accepted his benign leadership. To talk of maintaining peace through the balance of power or through the threat of nuclear deterrence is foolish. The might of armaments can only produce fear and not peace. It is impossible that there can be genuine and lasting peace through fear. Through fear can come only hatred, ill will, and hostility, suppressed perhaps for the time being only, but ready to erupt and become violent at any moment. True and genuine peace can prevail only in an atmosphere of metta, amity, free from fear, suspicion, and danger. Buddhism aims at creating a society where the ruinous struggle for power is renounced, where calm and peace prevail away from conquest and defeat, where the persecution of the innocent is vehemently denounced, where one who conquers oneself is more respected than those who conquer millions by military and economic warfare, where hatred is conquered by kindness and evil by goodness, where enmity, jealousy, ill will, and greed do not infect men's minds, where compassion is the driving force of action, where all, including the least of living things, are treated with fairness, consideration, and love, where life in peace and harmony, in a world of material contentment, is directed towards the highest and noblest aim, the realization of the ultimate truth, nirvana.